Chapter 3705. A pair of good and evil boom. As soon as Dark Nyation uttered these words, a shudder ran through his body, and he took a step forward. His aura once again burst forth, and endless dark demon chi started to swirl madly, morphing into numerous terrifying magical symbols that swirled around his body. Inverse, celestial demon runes. Nyation's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help but exclaim when he saw the demon chi symbols on Dark Nyation's body. He could recognize those dark runes. They were the inverse celestial demon runes. Previously, when he had activated his celestial demon body, the inverse celestial demon runes on his arm had increased his strength tremendously. At this moment, Dark Nyation's body was almost completely covered with inverse celestial demon runes. Furthermore, the aura of each inverse celestial demon rune on his body was more terrifying than the one on Nyation's body. Boom! At this moment, Dark Nyation's aura had reached an unprecedented level. The inverse celestial demon runes had increased his strength significantly. Nyation's eyes couldn't help but tremble. His expression froze, and he was at a loss for words. Dark Nyation's strength was much more terrifying than he had expected. Nyation, although the celestial demon original embryo is in your body, you know nothing about its true strength. Dark Nyation's eyes were like an abyss, as he said in a trembling voice. Do you think the celestial demon original embryo only has the strength of 9,000 celestial demons? Let me tell you, the celestial demon original embryo is not able to unleash its true strength in your body. The strength of the first taboo is not something you can imagine. Ha ha ha! As he finished speaking, Dark Nyation burst into wild laughter. His arrogant aura pervaded the air, making him seem even crazier and more violent. Nyation's eyes narrowed and his face darkened. As Dark Nyation had said, the two of them were the twin flowers of good and evil. They could not coexist, and only one of them could survive. Light and darkness repelled each other, and only one of them could survive. You said that you're my dark side. How much power have you inherited from me? Nyation's gaze hardened, and he became much calmer. The corner of his lips curled into a cold smile as he said, I'd like to see if you're as powerful as you say you are. Sure. Dark Nyation smiled coldly and said, You will soon see how terrifying the real me is. Boom! As he spoke, Dark Nyation took a step forward. His aura skyrocketed to the extreme. Violent demonic chi surged out like 1,000 waves, crashing into the sky. Nyation looked at the dark person in front of him and sneered strangely. I wonder if you've inherited my star force? Dark Nyation's eyes widened when he heard Nyation's words. He was born from the fiend god embryo. Not only did he inherit the fiend god embryo's power, but he also inherited other powers from Nyation, including the heart of the sky, the 9 dragon veins, and even the 9 life veins. However, the power of the Star Origin Stone was something he could not inherit. The Star Origin Stone seemed to have some sort of repulsion with the fiend god embryo, causing it to be unable to be inherited. Previously, when Nyation used the earth-destroying astral soul, Dark Nyation had said that he wanted to see how strong this power that even he could not possess was. Since Dark Nyation could not inherit the astral soul, it undoubtedly meant that he did not inherit the power of the Star Origin Stone. The Star Origin Stone was Nyation's greatest advantage. So what if you did not inherit it? You're like an ant in front of me. I can kill you in an instant. Dark Nyation Lung laughed coldly. He took a step forward, raised the demonic sword in his hand, and slashed downwards. Boom! Suddenly, a terrifying roar sounded in the air as a gigantic demonic sword shadow appeared. It was like a gigantic beast that walked out from the darkness, its terrifying aura capable of devouring the heavens and earth. Nyation's eyes widened, and his pupils flickered. The oppressive devil chi that assaulted him in the face actually made him feel like he couldn't breathe. Dark Nyation's strength was indeed stronger than his. Black Tortoise Astral Soul, activate. In the next instant, Niet Tion's lips twitched as astral inscriptions gushed out from his body. Under the illumination of the astral light, the black tortoise astral soul gushed out, causing the surrounding space to tremble. The black tortoise astral soul was Niet Tion's last resort. He had only used it now. Boom! Following which, the demonic chi sword shadow landed on the black tortoise astral soul, causing a deafening boom to resound in the air. The demonic chi sword shadow was incomparably tyrannical, yet it failed to shatter the black tortoise astral soul. Instead, the gigantic sword shadow stagnated in the air, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Boom, boom, boom. Following which, the two forces clashed against each other, causing waves of energy to surge outwards, akin to a myriad of beasts, devouring everything in their path. Niet Tion, is this the final strength you are relying on? Dark Niet Tion Lung laughed maniacally. Merely so. Rumble. Bang, bang, bang. As the sound of his voice faded, a deafening explosion rang out in the air. The Devil Chi sword shadow and the Xuanwu astral soul actually shattered at the same time. A moment later, a terrifying explosion erupted forth, causing the heavens to collapse and the earth to crack. Right at this moment, Niet Tion's eyes flickered, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he coldly said, "Die." Boom! In the next instant, boundless dragon chi gushed out from his body, and with a palm strike, a thunder dragon appeared, rushing towards Dark Niet Tion. Dragon chi. Seeing this, Dark Niet Tion sneered. You want to kill me with this kind of strength? Isn't it too ridiculous? Before his voice faded, he directly struck out with his palm, and the moment the palm shadow landed, it directly shattered the thunder dragon. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. However, at this moment, in the void, a space-time blade appeared, directly tearing the void apart, and in an instant, the surrounding space collapsed on a large scale. Boom, boom, boom. Immediately after, endless space-time storm appeared, like a terrifying hurricane, enveloping Dark Niet Tion. The sudden scene caused Dark Niet Tion's eyes to narrow, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He immediately understood that Niet Tion had hidden a space-time blade in the body of the Thunder Dragon. The Black Tortoise Astral Soul was not a killer move, and neither was the Thunder Dragon. The real killer move was the space-time blade. It had to be said that Niet Tion was really too smart, and his talent for combat was extremely high. He wanted to use a large-scale space-time storm to kill Dark Niet Tion. Niet Tion, you can't escape. At this moment, Dark Niet Tion growled, and then his figure was swallowed by the space-time storm, directly pulled into the space-time crack. Looking at the scene in front of him, Niet Tion couldn't help but tremble slightly. Even if Dark Niet Tion fell into the space-time crack, he still couldn't be sure whether Dark Niet Tion would die or not. Faintly, he had a hunch that Dark Niet Tion was like a shadow under his light and would always follow him. Chapter 3706. Chapter 3701. Chapter 3701. Suppression of the Soul. Niet Tion stared at the spot where the Dark Niet Tion had disappeared. His eyes trembled slightly, but his expression did not relax. Instead, it became more and more serious. To this day, he still couldn't figure out why Dark Niet Tion had suddenly appeared. At the same time, the ominous feeling in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Would Niet Tion really be in darkness with him forever? The chaos in the void gradually subsided after a long time. The shattered void slowly returned to its calm state. Niet Tion waited in the same spot for a long time, but the Dark Niet Tion did not reappear. However, he had a strong feeling that the Dark Niet Tion was not dead. Although he had been sucked into the rift of time, with his abilities, he should be able to survive. Niet Tion let out a sigh and prepared to leave. However, as soon as he moved, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His body trembled violently, and he fell from the sky. In midair, his consciousness suddenly became weak. With the last bit of his will, he activated the 9 extremities. Bang! Then, like a giant rock, he landed heavily on the ground. The last thing he saw was the figures of Lan Zhuing, Yu Dong, and the others appearing, before he fell into a coma. 3 days later, in a remote valley, Nyetion finally regained consciousness. His eyes slowly opened, and the scene before him gradually became clearer. Nyetion, you're finally awake. As soon as Nyetion woke up, he heard Lan Zhuiying's voice. Her clear voice was filled with unconcealable nervousness and excitement. Nyetion reluctantly agreed. He tried to sit up, but found that his entire body was extremely sore. Even a slight movement made him feel like his body was about to be torn apart. His injuries were too serious. Even with the regenerative ability of his martial body, the wounds on his body had not healed even after 3 days and 3 nights of unconsciousness. Nyetion, don't move. Seeing this, Lan Zhuiying quickly stepped forward and gestured to Nyetion to just lie down and not move. 3 days ago, when Lan Zhuiying and the others came out of the 9 Superbs, they saw Nyetion lying on the ground with blood all over his body. Almost none of his flesh and bones were intact. He was just like a pile of minced meat, with only a weak aura remaining. It was hard to imagine that Nyetion could survive in such a state. If it was any other martial artist, they would have died long ago. Needless to say, Nyetion's vitality was truly terrifying. Nyetion's gaze swept over Lan Zhuiying, Yudong, and another unfamiliar martial artist, and discovered that their complexions didn't seem to be good. However, since he could only lie on the ground and couldn't move, he didn't say anything. Right now, the most important thing for him was to rest and recover. Only when his martial body recovered could he do other things. At this moment, he had already woken up and his consciousness was clear. He could automatically circulate his yuan meridians, so no matter how serious his injuries were, he would recover very quickly. Following this, Lan Zhuiying and the others stayed by Nyetion's side, not leaving his side at all, for fear that something might happen to him. 3 days later, Nyetion's complexion looked much better. He could already sit up, and the wounds on his body were almost healed. Lan Zhuiying and the others looked at Nyetion with doubtful eyes. Obviously, they did not expect Nyetion's martial body to recover so quickly. If it were any other martial artist of the same level, they would need at least a month to recover from such serious injuries, even with the help of experts. Nyetion, on the other hand, had spent 3 days recovering on his own. The aptitude of his martial body was too terrifying. I'm fine. At this moment, Nyetion stood up and smiled faintly. His eyes regained their usual sharpness, and his aura had also recovered. Although his martial body was still a little uncomfortable, he already had 70 to 80% of his combat strength. Lan Zhuiying, it's been hard on you all these days. Nyetion's lips curled up as he looked at Lan Zhuiying and said with a faint smile. Lan Zhuiying only smiled and did not say anything. In fact, they did not do much. Everything depended on Nyetion himself. Lord Nyetion, who was it that could actually injure you so severely? At this moment, Yudong could not help but ask in a deep voice. He had seen Nyetion fight many times and knew how terrifying Nyetion was. Among all the Blood Soul martial artists, there were only a few who could match up to Nyetion. It was rare for Nyetion's injuries to be so serious. Yudong did not expect that there would be such a terrifying person among the Blood Soul martial artists to be able to injure Nyetion to this extent. Nyetion smiled bitterly and didn't say anything else. He's an unexpected person. He didn't want to tell anyone about Dark Nyetion, not to mention that he himself hadn't figured out how Dark Nyetion had appeared. Yudong saw that Nyetion did not want to talk about it, so he did not continue to ask. Yudong, you don't look too good. Did something happen? At this moment, Nyetion saw that Yudong and the others were pale and their eyes were filled with exhaustion. He could not help but ask. Yudong and the others had not experienced any battles, so they should not have such expressions. I don't know what happened either. Yudong looked helpless and shook his head. When I came out of the 9 Superbs, I felt a pressure on my divine soul. It had a great suppression on my divine soul and martial body. Nyetion's eyes narrowed. He did not expect it to be like this. Moreover, this divine soul pressure is getting stronger. I can't take it anymore. Yudong frowned, and his face looked even worse than before. He also did not know why this was happening. Lan Zhuiying, are the two of you the same? Nie Tian frowned and glanced at Lan Zhuiying and the other martial artist as he asked. Yes. The two nodded slightly, unable to conceal the anxiety on their faces. If that divine soul pressure continued to grow stronger, it would directly cause their divine souls to collapse. Could it be because of the blood soul? Nie Tian frowned and guessed in his heart. Although Lan Jing and the other two had followed him into the path of blood soul, they did not obtain the blood soul in the blood-colored whirlpool. Nie Tian did not feel the divine soul pressure in the space, and the other martial artists did not feel it either. The biggest possibility was that Lan Zhuiying and the other two had not merged with the blood soul, so the space in the path of blood soul had produced a divine soul pressure on their divine souls. Lan Zhuiying, you three return to the 9 superbs first. After pondering for a while, Nie Tian decided to let Lan Zhuiying and the other two return to the 9 superbs. Saying this, he took a step forward and prepared to open the 9 superbs. Chapter 3707. Celestial Demons. Nie Tian, what's wrong with you? Lan Zhuiying asked after seeing Nie Tian's strange expression. Nie Tian's expression grew incomparably strange. However, just as he opened his mouth to speak, he suddenly froze, and a shocking expression took place on his face. Streaks of dark runes appeared, as if they were brands. They instantly spread out and covered his entire face. The runes were incomparably dark, releasing a black, demonic aura. In an instant, a chilling aura filled the entire valley. The sudden turn of events caused Lan Zhuiying and the others to gasp in shock. They had not expected Nie Tian's body to undergo such a strange transformation. Boom! At that instant, a terrifying demonic aura was emitted from Nie Tian's body. His clothes were torn apart, revealing his majestic martial body. His body was covered with dark runes, just like his face. The terrifying dark runes were branded on Nie Tian's body like tattoos, emitting streams of black demonic aura, making him look like an abyss of demonic aura. Nie Tian, Master Nie Tian. Only then did Lan Zhuiying and Yudong react, and they both exclaimed in shock. The transformation on Nie Tian's body was too shocking. They were stunned for a long time before they came back to their senses. At the same time, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard. His voice became sharp due to the shock, and he said in a trembling voice, "Inverse celestial demon runes." That's right, the dark runes on Nie Tian's body were the inverse celestial demon runes. Previously, Nie Tian's body had the inverse celestial demon runes, but it only appeared on his arms, and the aura of the inverse celestial demon runes was not as dark as it was now. At this moment, the celestial demon inverse marks on Nie Tian's body covered his entire body. The aura of the inverse marks was extremely dark, eerie, and terrifying. With such a dark aura, one would feel as though they were about to fall into it. "Don't come near me." At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly growled and said in a deep voice. He did not know why the God Fiend inverse inscription had suddenly appeared, nor did he know what was going to happen next. However, he felt that all of this might have something to do with the appearance of Dark Nie Tian. It was even possible that Darkness Nie Tian had returned to his God Fiend nascent embryo and wanted to occupy his body. The eyes of Lan Zhuiying and the others trembled. The horror in their hearts was written perfectly on their faces. Nie Tian's current state was simply too frightening. Anyone who saw it would be incomparably shocked. Lan Zhuiying and the rest retreated subconsciously, not daring to approach Nie Tian. At this moment, Nie Tian's body suddenly trembled. He looked up to the sky and let out a heart-wrenching howl. His eyes were opened so wide that one could clearly see his pupils. They were extremely dark, like two dark abysses, hiding the most frightening demonic chi. Boom! The demonic chi in his body suddenly surged and rushed into the empty space. It was as though a dark demon had opened its bloody mouth and was about to devour everything. Lan Zhuiying and the rest could feel the terrifying pressure of the demonic chi. They kept retreating, and their eyes were trembling in fear. They had no idea what to do. Then, like a wild beast, Nietion let out another hysterical roar. At the same time, the demon chi around him grew even more violent, surging like raging waves, as if it were going to devour everything in its path. At this moment, a terrifying force rose from the god-fiend nascent embryo in his body and attacked crazily, as though it was about to tear his martial body and divine soul apart. The tearing pain was as though his flesh and soul were being cut by thousands of sharp blades. It was unbearable. Nietion's body was completely enveloped by the demonic chi. The inverse celestial demon runes were like sharp blades, penetrating his body bit by bit, as though they were about to tear his body apart. The tearing pain instantly spread throughout his body. No matter how strong Nietion's mind was, he could not help but let out a miserable howl. Boom, boom, boom. The demonic aura surrounding his body surged violently into the sky. It was like a terrifying wave that rolled and wreaked havoc. Under the pressure of this demonic aura, the void actually showed a strange state of collapse. One could imagine how terrifying this demonic aura was. Such a strong god-fiend chi. It's even scarier than that dark guy. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he sensed the demonic chi around Nietion. The demonic chi around Nietion was even scarier than that of Nietion. It seemed like Nietion's god-fiend power was undergoing some kind of terrifying mutation. "Hang in there, Nietion," the Ghost Emperor said in a low voice, reminding Nietion to stay awake. He had a feeling that if Nietion fell into a coma, he would never wake up again. Nietion did not respond, but his eyes flickered with a strange light. His face was contorted due to the excruciating pain, as though he was a demon that had just walked out of hell. At this moment, he was experiencing the most terrifying pain in his life. He could even feel that his martial body and divine soul were in a state of collapse due to the impact of the dark power. However, the power of the stars in his body was able to suppress the dark power. Coupled with the existence of the heavenly shackles, his martial body and divine soul did not collapse. At the same time, Nietion also sensed that the power of his martial body was increasing rapidly. The godfiend inverse runes were seeping into his martial body and tearing it apart. At the same time, they were also fusing with his martial body and increasing its power. Lan Zhuiying and the others were watching from the side, their eyes trembling nonstop. They could not imagine what kind of pain Nietion was currently experiencing. Given Nietion's temperament, it was obvious how much pain he was suffering. Boom, boom, boom. Meanwhile, the demonic chi around Nietion's body became even more violent. It was like a raging wave that kept attacking, as if the demonic chi was endless. Nietion felt that his body was going numb, but his mind was still clear. Although his eyes were incomparably dark, they flickered with a strange light. After a long time, the demonic chi around Nietion finally stopped increasing and started to calm down. At this moment, the godfiend inverse runes on Nietion's body had completely seeped into his martial body and slowly started to fuse with it. He could clearly feel that his martial body was constantly expanding. The feeling of power exploding made him feel incomparably excited. Nietion, focus your mind and fuse with the godfiend inverse runes. The Ghost Emperor's excited voice was heard. As long as Nietion could successfully fuse with the godfiend inverse runes, his strength would once again increase dramatically. When Lan Zhuiying and the others saw Nietion became cold, their faces relaxed a little. Roar! At this moment, a deep roar suddenly came from outside the valley. The aura shook the earth. Chapter 3708. Chapter 373. Chapter 373. Enemies on a narrow road. When Lan Zhuiying and the rest heard the beast roar, their faces changed. Roar! In the next moment, a deep roar was heard as a gigantic beast appeared outside the valley. This is... Yudong's eyes trembled as he looked at the gigantic beast. His expression changed, and he was so shocked that he couldn't speak. The gigantic beast was a few hundred meters tall. Its body was like a mountain, and its aura shook the heavens and earth violently. This giant beast was the same one that Nietian had encountered. However, it was much stronger than the one he had encountered. In the valley, Nietian sensed the terrifying aura, and his expression changed. His eyes narrowed, and his heart sank when he saw the giant beast. He had fought this kind of giant beast before, so of course he knew how terrifying it was. However, at that moment, he was in the midst of merging the celestial demon inverse mark. He could not afford to be distracted, let alone fight. Boom! At this time, the giant beast moved and directly rushed into the valley. Stop it! Lan Zhuing reacted instantly and said hurriedly. Nietian was obviously in the middle of some kind of fusion and could not be disturbed. Yes. Yudong's eyes narrowed, and he nodded. He took a step forward and unleashed his aura to block the giant beast's path. Roar! At this moment, the gigantic beast let out a low growl, and its body soared into the sky. It charged towards Nietian with a powerful aura, and a terrifying oppressive force filled the air as it charged towards Nietian. The demonic aura on Nietian's body seemed to have some kind of attraction to this giant beast, causing it to directly pounce over. Dream on! Seeing this, Yudong let out a low roar and slammed his palm horizontally. A terrifying palm shadow oppressed the void and bombarded the giant beast. Boom! In the next moment, the shadow of the palm landed on the gigantic beast. An explosion sounded in the void, and the shadow of the palm collapsed. Be careful! Lan Zhuing's eyes trembled as she screamed in shock. Suddenly, the jade sea mirroring moon appeared in her hand, and she slashed out with it. The sound of crashing waves resounded in the air as the shadow of her sword whizzed out like a gigantic wave. Bang! Immediately after, the gigantic body of the gigantic beast collided with the sword shadow. A muffled sound that sounded like a clap of thunder resounded in the void. The sword shadow directly collapsed, and the attack of the gigantic beast weakened a lot. Yudong and Lan Zhuing joined forces and managed to block the giant beast's attack. Kill! At this moment, a low roar resounded. Another cultivator made his move. An incomparably ferocious fist shadow blasted towards the gigantic beast. Bang! This warrior's strength was not weak. He was already in the 5th tier of the heavenly mandate realm. However, when his fist landed, it shattered right away. It did not cause any damage to the giant beast at all. Roar! The gigantic beast roared and revealed its ferocious appearance. A violent aura rushed into the void. Its body moved and charged towards the warrior. The cultivator's eyes trembled and his expression changed. Large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his expression became sluggish. The aura of the gigantic beast was too strong. Just the pressure alone was enough to suffocate him. Boom! In the next moment, the gigantic beast rushed over and slammed out with its palm. Several cold, sharp blades appeared in the air and attacked the warrior. The warrior's eyes trembled. He was actually scared silly and stood motionless on the spot. Quick dodge! At this critical moment, Yudong let out a low roar. His entire body surged, and he slammed out with his palm. Suddenly, the shadow of his palm was like a dragon, roaring and rushing towards the gigantic beast. Bang! The shadow of the palm fell directly. With a muffled sound, the figure of the gigantic beast trembled in the air. Its attack was greatly affected. However, there was still a sharp blade that fell and left a horrifying bloody wound on the martialist's body. While he was still in midair, fresh blood gushed out and instantly dyed his body red. Lan Zhuing's body moved. The jade ocean mirroring moon spun in the air, and a soft sword energy enveloped the warrior and caught him. The warrior's figure fell. The wound on his body was so deep that his bones could be seen. If it was any deeper, his entire body would have been cut in half. Luckily, Yudong and Lan Zhuing acted in time. Otherwise, this warrior would have died without a doubt. All of you step back. Yudong moved and blocked in front of the gigantic beast as he growled. Lan Zhuing and the warrior's abilities were limited, and they had no way of fighting against the gigantic beast. However, Just as Yudong's voice trailed off, his body suddenly trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes darkened, and his expression became extremely ugly. At that moment, he could feel the pressure from the qi inside his body becoming even more terrifying, making it hard for him to breathe. Yudong glanced at Nietian and noticed that the latter was still absorbing the demonic qi outside his body. He would need some time. Roar! At that moment, the gigantic beast let out a deep roar, and its entire body's aura surged into the air. Its powerful aura caused the heavens and earth to tremble. Son of AB***, since you are courting death, I shall grant your wish. Yudong's eyes darkened, and the corner of his lips curled into a cold grin. Following this, the aura from his body skyrocketed and was accompanied by a bloody aura. The power of the blood meridians, burning the blood qi. Upon seeing this, Lan Zhuiying's beautiful eyes quivered and she blurted out in shock. In order to fight against the gigantic beast, Yudong had used the power of his blood meridians and burned his blood qi. Bang! Following this, the gigantic beast's body moved and charged forward. Its terrifying aura covered the heavens and earth as it crushed down on Yudong. Die! Yudong's eyes flickered and he let out a deep roar. The aura from his body was incomparably violent and circulated in the air like a sharp blade. Boom! In the next second, he slammed his palm forward. Instantly, a terrifying windstorm appeared and headed towards the gigantic beast. The combination of the power of his blood meridians and the burning of his blood qi was his strongest attack. Even if he could not kill the beast, he could at least injure it severely. Does this kind of power deserve to be called the power of your blood meridians? However, right at that moment, a deep voice suddenly rang out in the sky. Then, an enormous amount of energy appeared and caused the entire space to tremble. Bang! Then, the shadow of the palm in the sky trembled slightly and was crushed by the enormous amount of energy. This unexpected scene made Yudong's eyes widen. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Bang! At this moment, the gigantic beast's palm landed on Yudong's body. After a muffled sound, Yudong's figure drew a bloody trail in the air and heavily smashed into the mountain wall on the side of the valley. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Yudong! Lan Zhuiying's beautiful eyes trembled as she screamed in shock. Then, she abruptly turned around and looked into the sky. Two silhouettes were standing there. It was Dong Fangting and Sang Hui. It's you. Lan Zhuiying's pretty face froze, and her voice became much sharper. She never thought that Dong Fangting and Sang Hui would appear at this moment. Chapter 3709. Chapter 374. Chapter 374. Don T heard him. Lan Zhuiying stared at Dong Fangting and Sang Hui with a stunned expression, unable to react for a long time. She did not expect that the people who appeared at this moment were actually two fellows who had a deep grudge against Nietian. Before the Blood Soul Path was opened, Sang Hui and Dong Fangting had already formed enmity with Nietian. The two of them wished they could skin Nietian alive. At this moment, they finally had the chance to take revenge. Dong Fangting's eyes surged with a fierce cold light. They were like two sharp blades that firmly locked onto Nietian, and a strong killing intent was on the verge of bursting out. Sang Hui also had a sinister look on his face. His eyes were filled with an indescribable heat. His killing intent was low and heavy. At that moment, Nietian's entire body was surging with demonic energy. His aura was terrifying. In his martial body, the divine demon inverse mark was slowly fusing. He focused all his attention on the integration of the God Fiend inverse inscription and could not afford to be distracted. Even if Dong Fangting and Sang Hui attacked him directly, he wouldn't be distracted. Roar! At that moment, the gigantic beast let out another furious roar, and its gigantic body suddenly moved. Like a small hill, it roared madly and charged towards Nietian. Nietian! When Lan Zhuiying saw this, her beautiful eyes suddenly trembled, and her originally clear voice became sharp and shrill. Little bastard, Nietian is my prey. He's not someone you can touch. Almost at the same time, Dongfang Ting's eyes trembled as he spoke in a cold tone. Immediately after, he struck out with his palm, and a ball of flames appeared. It condensed into a fireball in the air and enveloped the gigantic beast. Boom! In the next moment, where the fireball landed, the void trembled slightly. The gigantic beast was directly incinerated, and not even its bones were left. The scene before her caused Lan Zhuiying's eyes to tremble in fear. Her mouth was wide open, but she was unable to make a sound. She had not expected Dongfang Ting's strength to be so terrifying. The beast's body was very strong, but it was turned into ashes by Dongfang Ting's palm strike. Nie Tian, if I can't kill you with my own hands, how can I dispel the hatred in my heart? Dongfang Ting smiled coldly. His eyes flickered with a cold light, and his entire person was as cold as a block of ice. Of course, he didn't kill that giant beast to save Nie Tian, but to kill Nie Tian with his own hands. Nie Tian, accept your death. Dongfang Ting smiled sinisterly. The corners of his mouth curled up into a cold arc. He took a step forward and his aura rose. Streams of terrifying flames rushed out, and the space within a radius of tens of thousands of meters turned into a sea of fire. The entire valley was filled with an incomparably blazing aura, like a furnace. You can't kill Nie Tian. Lan Zhuiying reacted, stepped forward, and stood in front of Dongfang Ting. However, her expression was extremely ugly. The pressure on her spiritual soul, coupled with the flame aura released by Dongfang Ting, was almost too much for her to bear. Little beauty, wait for me to kill Nie Tian first, then I'll play with you. Dongfang Ting looked at Lan Zhuiying with a pair of lustful eyes and said with a chuckle, "Bang!" Immediately, he waved his hand, and a wave of flames roared out. Lan Zhuiying didn't have time to react and was directly hit to the side of the mountain wall. She was only a saint master in the second tier of the heavenly mandate realm. In front of Dongfang Ting, a saint in the first tier of heavenly justice, she had no power to fight back. Nie Tian die. Then, without any hesitation, Dongfang Ting's eyes suddenly turned cold. With a low roar, he slapped out with his palm. Suddenly, the power of flames all over his body rolled out and condensed into a terrible palm of flames in the void. The blazing aura seemed to devour everything, pressing directly toward Nie Tian. Boom! The terrifying palm of flames seemed to be able to swallow the heavens. The next moment, when it fell, it would instantly swallow Nie Tian. Nie Tian. When Lan Zhuiying saw this scene, her eyes trembled and she screamed in horror. However, at that moment, she couldn't move at all, and it was even more impossible for her to save Nie Tian. At the critical moment of life and death, a sudden change occurred. "Don't hurt him!" In the void, a low voice sounded, and then a blood-colored figure appeared. A violent aura surged out, and it actually rushed toward the palm of flames. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound rang out in the void, and the palm of flames shattered. At the same time, a crimson color appeared in the sky, and the smell of blood spread, filling the entire valley. The sudden scene made Lan Zhuiying's eyes tremble. She was actually stunned, and she couldn't react for a long time. That blood-colored light actually came from Yudong. In order to protect Nie Tian, Yudong used his last breath to explode with one last attack, blocking the fatal palm for Nie Tian. However, under the palm of flames, he was directly turned into ashes, and not even his bones were left. Yudong hadn't known Nie Tian for a long time, so he didn't speak much. He only followed King Nanyu's orders and protected Nie Tian with all his might. At this moment, in order to protect Nie Tian, he actually died under Dongfang Ting's palm. A piece of trash wants to stop me? What a joke. Dongfang Ting's eyes were as cold as ice. In an instant, the fiery aura around his body became even more violent. Terrifying tongues of flames swallowed the void, making him look like a volcano that was about to erupt. Nie Tian, you really aren't simple. There are actually people who are willing to die for you. Dongfang Ting immediately locked his gaze on Nie Tian again and said in a low voice, "But today, you will die without a doubt." Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward. His aura soared to the sky, causing the void to tremble. It was as if the sky and earth were about to collapse. Die. Then a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He attacked again, and a terrifying palm of flames appeared. It was rolling and oppressive, causing the void to rumble endlessly as it rushed towards Nietion. Nietion sat there cross-legged, not moving at all. He was like a boulder in the middle of a monstrous wave, as steady as a mountain. Boom! In the next instant, the flaming palm descended and Nietion's figure was completely engulfed. Lan Zhuing's beautiful eyes trembled as she screamed in horror. Nietion. Her face was stiff and lifeless. She couldn't believe her eyes. She had actually seen Nietion being engulfed by the flaming palm. Nietion, aren't you very strong? Now you're going to die in my hands. Dongfang Ting looked at the tumbling flames in the void. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile as he laughed maniacally. Is that so? However, before he could finish laughing, a deep and eerie voice rang out from the endless flames, causing his smile to instantly stiffen. Chapter 3710. Not dead. You all deserve to die. Nietion did not die. Dongfang Ting's eyes trembled. He could not believe his eyes, and his face was filled with disbelief. He could not believe that Nietion was sitting there, taking the full brunt of his palm, and was still alive. This was too frightening. How could Nietion possess such terrifying power? How could he resist the burning power of the flames with his body of flesh and blood? Dongfang Ting sang hui. At this time, Nietion's figure stepped out of the raging waves of flames. The demonic aura around his body seemed to be boiling, tumbling endlessly. His eyes were incomparably dark and sharp like the sharpest blade. He slowly swept his gaze over Dongfang Ting and sang hui, and said word by word, "You all deserve to die." As the word die fell, Nietion's wild killing intent could no longer be controlled. It seemed to merge with the demonic aura around his body, making him look even darker and more frightening. Dongfang Ting could feel Nietion's aura and killing intent. His eyes could not help but tremble. The fear in his heart was written all over his face, and he was completely speechless. He could clearly feel that the soaring killing intent on Nietion's body was definitely not something he could contend with. Moreover, Nietion's aura was many times stronger than before, especially the demonic aura around Nietion's body. The surging aura was like thousands of demons rushing out of hell, wanting to devour the world. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, Dongfang Ting would never have believed that a warrior's aura could be so dark. Nietion, Lan Zhuing was also stunned by the scene in front of her. Her beautiful eyes trembled as she looked at Nietion from afar, not knowing what to say. As for Sang Hui, he was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. Like a stone statue, he stood rooted to the ground, unable to react for a long time. Die! At this moment, the corners of Nietion's mouth twitched. He took a step forward, and his figure was like a black ray of light. In an instant, he arrived at Dongfang Ting's side. You? Dongfang Ting suddenly felt a flash of darkness in front of him. He screamed in horror, but then he could no longer make sound. His neck was tightly gripped by a large hand that was like an iron pincer. His face was flushed red with blood, and his eyeballs were protruding out. His facial features looked extremely hideous under the immense pressure. His eyes stared at the dark face in front of him with extreme shock. The fear in his heart was magnified infinitely through his eyes. Last words. Nietion's large hands were like iron pincers, like a fierce tiger pressing down on a little lamb. The corners of his mouth twitched as he spoke coldly. Nietion, you can't kill me. I am the son of the vice sect master of the Blood Soul sect. I am Dongfang Ting. If you dare to kill me. Dongfang Ting's eyes trembled with extreme horror. His voice trembled, and every word he said consumed a great deal of his strength. But before he could finish, he was forcefully interrupted by Nietion. Such last words are meaningless. Nietion spoke coldly. His hand slowly tightened, and Dongfang Ting's neck immediately tightened. His face was flushed red, then purple, then black. His eyes were forcibly squeezed out, and his face was dyed red with blood. He was unrecognizable. At the moment of his death, he still wanted to threaten Nietian. What a joke. If Nietian accepted such a threat, then he would not be Nietian. Dongfang Ting had killed Yudong. Even if he was the son of the emperor, he must die. Nietian's hands slowly tightened, killing Dongfang Ting bit by bit. He wanted him to experience the most direct and extreme despair in this world. Bang! After a long time, there was a muffled cracking sound in the air. Dongfang Ting's head had been forcibly broken by Nietian. It was a bloody scene that was incomparably tragic. Dongfang Ting's eyes were filled with extreme terror before he died. It was a kind of fear that had reached the pinnacle of despair. It was extremely tragic. After Nietian brutally killed Dongfang Ting, he suddenly turned around and glared at Sang Hui like a venomous wolf. Sang Hui suddenly felt an oncoming murderous intent. His dull eyes trembled, and he finally reacted. At this moment, the shock in his heart could not be any greater. He could not imagine that Dongfang Ting, a genius cultivator with the strength of Saint Lord Tianyi, would be killed by Nietian in such a primitive and cruel way. Of course, he could feel that Nietian's current strength was many times stronger than before he had entered the path of Blood Soul. He did not know how Nietian's strength had increased so quickly in such a short period of time. But he knew that he was at the end of his rope. Not only was Nietian powerful, but he was also extraordinarily fast. It was impossible for Sang Hui to escape from him. Nietian, what are you doing? At this moment, Nietian walked over. Sang Hui's eyes trembled, and he subconsciously retreated. His voice was trembling, and his legs could not help but turn to jelly. What do you think? Nietian's lips curled into a cold smile. The murderous intent in his eyes surged like flames. Don't kill me. I am from a Blood Soul sect, and my father is the hall leader of the Blood Soul sect. If you kill me, my father will not let you off. Sang Hui retreated step by step, and his words were no longer logical. At this moment, he was still stupid enough to threaten Nietian. Nietian did not even hesitate to kill Dongfang Ting. Why would he care about Sang Hui's identity? Sang Hui, you wanted to kill me when you were in the Yin City. Now that I am standing in front of you, why don't you make a move? Nietian's eyes were as sharp as a blade, and his whole person was like a wild beast as he growled. Sang Hui gulped and was completely speechless. In front of Nietian, he did not have the slightest strength to fight back. How could he take the initiative to attack? Nietian took a step forward, and his whole body's aura surged crazily. He spat out two last words coldly. Last words. Sang Hui was shocked. Just now, before Nietian killed Dongfang Ting, he had said these two words. At this time, he could no longer support himself. His knees went soft, and he directly knelt in front of Nietian. He kowtowed repeatedly and begged. Nietian, I beg you, spare me. I was wrong, and I won't dare to do it again. Spare you? Nietian Lung smiled coldly. His figure flickered, and he directly appeared in front of Sang Hui. He pressed one hand on the latter's head and said with a cold expression, Your begging appearance will only make me feel better when I kill you. You. Sang Hui's eyes trembled when he heard Nietian's words. He wanted to raise his head, but found that his body could not move at all. In the next moment, Nietian suddenly exerted force in his hand. After a muffled sound, there was a bloody scene in front of him. Sang Hui's head directly shattered, and blood and brain matter splattered everywhere. It was extremely tragic. Without hesitation, Nietian once again killed Sang Hui with cruel means. Chapter 37:11. Nietian killed Dongfang Ting and Sang Hui in a domineering manner. The devil qi on his body kept surging. He stood there like an abyss of devil qi, releasing a terrifying and suffocating devil qi. Nietian, are you okay? Lan Zhuiying, who was standing off to the side, was completely flabbergasted. Only after a long while did she come to her senses. She looked at Nietian with trembling eyes and called out cautiously. She had never seen such a dark and ferocious Nietian. She didn't even know that Niet Tian had such a terrifying side. She couldn't determine whether Niet Tian's state was normal at this time. Her heart was in her throat, and she was very nervous. "I'm fine." At this time, the devil chi on Niet Tian's body converged, and his dark eyes slowly returned to normal. His ferocious face eased a lot, and his expression returned to its previous indifference. He was like a different person from his previous state. Lan Zhuying looked at Niet Tian, and her beautiful eyes trembled slightly. She couldn't help but be stunned for a few seconds. Niet Tian's amazing change made her unable to react. It was hard to believe that the Niet Tian at this time and the Niet Tian just now were the same person. Niet Tian completely calmed down, and his expression returned to its previous indifference. However, his aura at this time was much stronger than before, and his eyes were even sharper. "Niet Tian, you broke through." At this time, Lan Zhuying finally found something unusual. Her beautiful eyes trembled, and she said in surprise. She only realized at this time that Niet Tian's strength had broken through from the 9th level of Heavenly Charm to the 1st level of the Heavenly Mandate Realm. No wonder Niet Tian's strength was so terrifying that he could kill Dongfang Ting and Sang Hui in an instant. Before, Niet Tian's combat strength was also above Dongfang Ting and Sang Hui. But if he wanted to kill them then, it would not be as easy as it was now. The 9th level of Heavenly Yun and the 1st level of Heavenly Mandate Realm seemed to be only a small realm apart, a step away. However, the difference between the two realms was like the difference between heaven and earth. The Heavenly Mandate Saint Masters could condense the Heavenly Mandate power in their bodies, which was a power far more powerful than the Heavenly Charm power. It was no exaggeration to say that the power of one Heavenly Mandate condensed by the same warrior was much more powerful than the power of 9 Heavenly Charms. Moreover, when a warrior ascended to the Heavenly Mandate realm, his martial experience would be greatly improved and become more powerful. It was precisely because Niet Tian had broken through to the Heavenly Mandate realm that his combat strength had a qualitative leap. He had tried to break into the Heavenly Mandate realm before, but failed. He didn't expect to break through in one fell swoop with the opportunity of integrating the Divine Demon inverse pattern. At this moment, Niet Tian sensed the changes in his martial body and was extremely surprised. He had fused with the Divine and Devil inverse mark, and his martial body was much stronger than before. Moreover, he could clearly feel that the Divine and Devil inverse mark was circulating within his body. That kind of terrifying aura made him unable to believe it. It was precisely because of the existence of the Divine and Devil inverse mark that he seemed so dark just now. Moreover, at this moment, when he released the Divine and Devil inverse mark, his whole body's devil chi was even more terrifying than dark Niet Tian's. Niet Tian couldn't help but feel a bit apprehensive and uneasy at the sight of such terrifying power. He could still control this power at this moment, but it didn't mean that he could control it forever. He didn't even know how the Divine and Devil inverse mark appeared. Just as Dark Niet Tian had said, he knew very little about the Divine Demon original embryo. Niet Tian, the power of the Divine and Devil inverse mark is too terrifying. You can't use it casually. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out and reminded Niet Tian. His eyes flickered slightly, and he couldn't hide his worry. He guessed that the reason why the Divine and Devil inverse mark appeared on Niet Tian's body might have something to do with Niet Tian. During the battle between Niet Tian and Dark Niet Tian, the latter's body had once appeared with the Divine and Devil inverse mark. Perhaps because of this, Niet Tian's Divine and Devil original embryo resonated and caused the Divine and Devil inverse mark to appear on a large scale. Although Niet Tian had successfully controlled the Divine and Devil inverse mark, it didn't mean that he was safe. It had been very dangerous just now. Niet Tian had almost been devoured by the Divine and Devil inverse mark. The Ghost Emperor also didn't know what kind of power the Divine and Devil inverse mark was, so it was better for Niet Tian not to use this power recklessly. Niet Tian nodded slightly. Of course, he knew what the Ghost Emperor was worried about. What the Ghost Emperor was worried about was also what he was worried about. Previously, When the divine and devil inverse Mark had fused with his martial body, he had even thought that he would be replaced by dark Nietion. Fortunately, he was back to normal now. Everything was more daunting than dangerous. However, Yudong and the other martialists had been sacrificed because of Nietion. Yudong had died at the hands of Dongfang Ting, while the other martialists had been killed by the giant beast. Nietion's face was gloomy, and he didn't speak for a long time. Yudong's death had made his heart feel heavy. Unfortunately, Yudong had been directly killed. Not even his bones were left. Otherwise, Nietion wouldn't have been stingy with an astral soul. The other martialist, Nietion, was also feeling guilty. After a long time, Nietion's expression softened a little. Nietion, I puffed. At that moment, Lan Zhuiying's expression suddenly changed. She called out to Nietion. Then, her delicate body trembled and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Lan Zhuiying, Nietion's eyes focused. He moved to Lan Zhuiying's side and supported her. He saw that Lan Zhuiying's face was very pale and bloodless. Her aura had even weakened a lot. What's going on? Nietion frowned. His divine sense swept across Lan Zhuiying's body. His expression suddenly changed, and he was stunned. He sensed a terrible divine soul pressure in Lan Zhuiying's body. It was becoming stronger and stronger. It was like a wild beast, crazily wreaking havoc in her divine soul space. Its divine soul pressure. Nietion's expression changed. He was surprised. Oh no. At the same time, the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded. The divine soul pressure in this little girl's body is too strong. She can't bear it anymore. If she can't force this divine soul out, her divine soul will collapse. Nietion's expression darkened. He then used his divine sense to test the divine soul pressure in Lan Zhuiying's body. However, he found that the divine soul pressure was like a thick iron wall. He couldn't penetrate it at all. Nietion, your soul energy is too weak. It's impossible for you to break this divine soul pressure. The Ghost Emperor frowned and said in a deep voice, Then what should we do? Nietion's pupils shrank. He couldn't help but become nervous. Yudong and that cultivator were already dead. He would not allow anything to happen to Lan Zhuiying. Let the little demonic fox help the little girl suppress the divine soul first. We'll figure out a way slowly. The Ghost Emperor said after a long silence. He didn't know what to do. This was the only feasible and reliable way. Okay, Nietion agreed. He used his divine sense to communicate with the eternal night demonic fox. He controlled the little demonic fox to release its soul energy to suppress the violent divine soul pressure in Lan Zhuiying's body. After a while, Nietion's forehead was covered in sweat. His face was pale. Fortunately, the divine soul pressure in Lan Zhuiying's body was temporarily suppressed. Phew! Nietion let out a long breath of turbid air, and his tense face relaxed a bit. However, the next moment his eyes trembled. He seemed to have sensed something. His expression changed. Chapter 37:12. A Frenzy of Beasts, Nietion heard the earth-shattering roar. He could not help but narrow his eyes, and his face showed an expression of shock that could not be concealed. The roar outside the valley resounded throughout the world. It was as if the sky and the void were trembling. It was extremely terrifying. Even though Nietion was in the middle of the valley, he could already sense the raging aura that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. It was as if the entire mountain range was trembling under its influence. He narrowed his eyes and put Lan Zhuiying into the 9 superbs. Then he moved and rushed out of the valley. The moment he rushed out of the valley, the scene in front of him made his eyes tremble, and his expression changed. It was very ugly. On the ground in the distance, turbid waves rushed into the sky, like the rolling mud after a landslide, roaring and rushing over. Wherever they passed, the towering and dense trees were directly submerged, and the mountain rocks were also shattered. The world was in chaos. Roar. The void was filled with terrible and chaotic roars, mixed with the roar, which seemed even more terrifying. It's those giant beasts. Nietion's eyes trembled, and he immediately reacted. His expression changed again, and he said two words in horror, beast tide. He now knew that the earth-shattering momentum in front of him came from the beast tide. The next moment, he saw the figure of a giant black beast appear. It was extremely ferocious, and its whole body was surging with an extremely violent aura. It was the giant beast he had encountered before. However, the colossal black beast that was leading the charge was extremely huge. It was actually over 1,000 meters in size. As it charged forward, it was like a black storm. Tion could not help but become gloomy. He knew the strength of this giant beast. This kind of giant beast with a body of 1,000 meters was at least comparable to a heavenly mandate ninth realm Saint Master. Boom, boom, boom. Roar, roar, roar. At this time, the roars and roars in the void became even more violent. The world seemed to be collapsing. The beasts rushed, and the terrible momentum covered the sky and the earth. They actually rushed directly toward Tion. Their target is me? Tion's eyes trembled, and he could not help but scream in his heart. The direction of the beast tide was the valley he was in. It seemed like the beast tide was coming for him. Roar! Just as he was bewildered, the huge and violent beast tide had already arrived. The giant beast at the very front let out a low roar, and like a clap of thunder, its huge body rushed over, like a small mountain. A violent aura filled the surrounding space, directly pouncing towards Tion. Courting death, Tion's eyes darkened slightly, and his face was surging with cold, killing intent. The sky sword appeared in his hand, and the soul of the sky was directly activated. The sword intent and sword momentum of his body soared to the extreme in an instant, and the surrounding world seemed to sink as if it was trembling. Kill! In the next moment, he shouted in a low voice. The sky sword streaked across the void, and a dazzling sword light surged out. The sword shadow whistled like a dragon, and the fierce aura pressed down on the void. Boom! Swoosh! Immediately, the sword shadow directly fell on the body of the giant beast, and wherever it passed, there was a bloody scene. The 1,000-meter-long black behemoth was split apart by the sword shadow. Blood sprayed wildly in the void, and the chaotic world was filled with the smell of blood. Tion's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not expect the power of this sword to be so strong. After his strength broke through to the heavenly mandate realm, his combat strength improved even more than he had imagined. However, after the charging giant beast was slaughtered by Tion, the other giant beasts were not afraid at all. Instead, under the influence of the smell of blood, they became even more violent, roaring one after another. Their voices shook the heavens and the earth, surging and stirring, making people's hearts tremble. Tion stood in the void as if he was ignoring the roars of the beasts. He was like a cold sword, and his eyes were extremely cold, without the slightest emotional fluctuation. At this time, he was like an iceberg, cold and murderous. Roar, roar, roar. At this time, the roars of the beasts were heard. Hundreds of giant beasts of the front rushed over together, and the terrible momentum connected in the void like a boundless giant wave, blasting towards Tion. Sacred heaven-defying sword. Sky sword reverses the sun. Tion's eyes slightly darkened, and the corners of his mouth twitched as he spoke in a low voice. Above the sword in the sky, the sword light shone brightly, and the sword light was as dazzling as the sun and the moon. Under the dazzling sword light, the most terrible killing intent was contained. Boom! In the next moment, the mighty sword shadow blasted out, like a violent dragon coming out of the abyss, blasting towards the beasts. Bang! The shadow of the sword descended upon the group of beasts. The void suddenly sank, and then there was a pause. The shadow of the sword paused for a moment, as though time and space had stopped. Then it directly collapsed, turning into endless sword intent and dissipating in an instant. Huh! Tion's eyes darkened, and he couldn't help but exclaim in shock as his countenance changed. He didn't expect that the combined might of the beasts would be so terrifying. Under a single strike of his sword, the sword shadow was directly shattered. after which he retreated a few hundred meters away, and at the same time, the sword will in his body gushed forth, forming a storm of sword will that resembled countless sharp blades, circulating in the air, incomparably tyrannical. Boom! But at this moment, the beast directly rushed over, and a terrifying aura permeated the air, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Astral Soul Shield activate. Nietion's eyes narrowed as his countenance changed. He directly activated the Astral Soul Shield, and his entire body shone with astral light, as resplendent as the sun. Rumble, bang, 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 after which the beast frenziedly rushed over, and the surrounding space abruptly sank. Momentarily, the mountain valley behind Nietion directly collapsed, and countless rocks and boulders were crushed under the force of the impact. At the same time, the astral soul shield around Nietion's body also collapsed. The strength of these gigantic beasts was extremely strong, and when they joined forces, it was even more terrifying. Even for someone as strong as Nietion, it was still somewhat difficult for him to withstand their attacks head-on. Nietion, you have to break through their barrier. At this moment, the voice of the Ghost Emperor rang out, and there was a hint of urgency in it. Nietion nodded his head, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Instantly, 9 shackles appeared in his body, and instantly fused together, forming a terrifying tentacle that directly enveloped the beasts. Bang! The 9 heavenly Tao shackles instantly descended, directly penetrating the invisible barrier of the beasts. The shackles were like steel tentacles, directly coiling around a gigantic beast and forcefully pulling it over. Die for me! The corners of Nietion's mouth twitched, and with a slash of his sword, the gigantic beast's stomach was directly split open by him in midair. The bloody smell of blood permeated the air, incomparably horrifying. Chapter 37:13. Mysterious blood. Soul Nietion's eyes were filled with murderous intent. His murderous intent was fused with his sword will, making him look extremely sharp and cold like ice. Boom! In the next moment, he willed the heavenly shackles to separate. Like a giant 9-headed snake, it forcefully broke through the beast's aura barrier. The heavenly force within the heavenly shackles was extremely effective against the giant beasts. It was even more effective than the sword will of the celestial demons. Roar, roar, roar. As the aura barrier was broken, the beasts let out a low growl. Pairs of bloodshot eyes were filled with a cold, murderous intent. Nietion's face darkened when he saw this. He could feel that there was a strange force within the bodies of these giant beasts that made their aura even more violent. He guessed that these giant beasts were most likely being controlled. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the giant beasts became even more violent. Dozens of giant beasts pounced at the same time, and their violent aura filled the air. It was extremely terrifying, and it pressed down on Nietion. Nietion could feel the murderous aura coming from all directions, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, his lips twitched, and his sword will exploded like a landslide. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, 12 heaven-slaying sword shadows appeared and shot up into the sky. They forcefully blocked the dozens of giant beasts, and the void was filled with blood. Boom. Immediately afterwards, the 12 sword images condensed into a massive sword image in the sky. It was several tens of thousands of meters long, like a giant that could prop up the heavens. A massive sword aura was released, and the power of the world changed under the pressure. Kill! Nietion's eyes darkened, and he let out a low roar. The sword shadow fell like a collapsing mountain. The surrounding heaven and earth suddenly tightened, as if it was about to collapse. Rumble. Bang, bang, bang. Then, the sword shadow fell, and a bloody scene appeared in the void. Wherever the sword shadow passed, blood shot into the sky, and it was glaring. Hundreds of giant beasts were crushed under the pressure of the sword shadow. Above the sky, a layer of blood rain fell, and the heavens and earth seemed to be covered with a layer of blood curtain. Boom. Bang, bang, bang. At that moment, the sword shadow landed and the ground was torn apart. A huge crack that was tens of thousands of meters long appeared on the ground, like a huge canyon. From this, it could be seen how powerful Nietion's sword was. Nietion opened up a path of blood with a single slash of his sword, after which a pair of astral soul wings appeared behind his back as his silhouette transformed into a beam of light, shooting through the air. However, the group of beasts did not let him go. They chased after him. These giant beasts are really coming for me. Is there something on me that they're interested in? Nietion moved like lightning. His eyes were focused and his face was gloomy. He was just guessing that the beast tide was coming for him. At this moment, he was convinced that the beast tide was really caused by him. He was very curious as to why these giant beasts were chasing him relentlessly. Could it be that there was something strange on his body? Nietion, take a closer look at the eyes of these beasts. At this moment, the voice of the ghost emperor rang out, reminding Nietion. Nietion frowned. His silhouette paused in the air before he turned around and slashed out with his sword. The violent sword intent was like a gigantic tidal wave, forcefully blocking the attacks of the beasts. At this moment, Nietion directly opened his devil eye. His gaze was like a sharp blade, locking onto the eyes of a giant beast. At this moment, he seemed to have discovered something. His expression involuntarily changed as he exclaimed in surprise. He discovered that in the eyes of the giant beast, other than the aura of blood, there was actually a blood-colored rune hidden within. Blood soul. When Nietion sensed the aura of the rune, his eyes couldn't help but tremble. His expression abruptly changed as he exclaimed in shock. Although the blood-colored rune in the eyes of the giant beast was slightly different from the blood soul in Nietion's body, its aura was extremely similar. It was obvious that there were different types of blood souls. Could it be that these giant beasts are being controlled by the blood soul ancestor? Nietion frowned as his heart sank. He already knew that the entire blood soul path was nurtured from the three souls' arcane heart. Therefore, it wasn't strange that these giant beasts were being controlled by the blood soul ancestor. Nietion, the suppression of the spiritual soul in that little girl's body is about to break down. If you want to save her, you have to find the blood soul ancestor. Perhaps you can find the blood soul ancestor through these giant beasts. While Nietion was still in a state of shock, the voice of the ghost emperor was heard once again. Nietion's eyes flickered as he nodded heavily. It seemed like the ghost emperor had the same idea as him. Since the blood soul ancestor was controlling these giant beasts, he might be able to find the blood soul ancestor through these giant beasts. Ghost emperor, what should I do next? Nietion's face darkened as he asked the beasts chasing after him. Let's control one of the giant beasts first, the ghost emperor said after a moment of thought. All right, Nietion replied as his body halted in midair. His eyes were like sharp blades as he locked onto one of the giant beasts. The beasts charged towards Nietion when they saw that he had suddenly stopped. These giant beasts were under the control of the blood soul ancestor and did not know what fear was. Their eyes were only filled with killing intent. Nietion's eyes darkened as he sensed the violent aura approaching him. He then took a step forward and charged towards the beast like a wild beast. Bang! While he was in midair, sword intent exploded from his body. His sword aura soared into the sky and forcefully dispersed the giant beasts. In the next moment, he arrived in front of the giant beast he had locked onto. His demonic eye flickered and a terrifying power surged out, enveloping the giant beast like an invisible wave. The giant beast's eyes trembled as it felt the power of the eye. Instantly, the blood soul rune in its eyes trembled and dispersed like a ripple. Bang! At that moment, Nietion suddenly felt a tremendous psychic impact, which made his soul tremble. Immediately afterwards, his soul awareness entered a strange space. The sudden change made Nietion's expression change as he exclaimed. The space he was in was extremely similar to the space he was in when he first met the blood soul ancestor. However, the mental energy in this space was stronger and the aura of the blood soul ancestor was stronger. Nietion, we meet again. At this moment, a deep voice sounded in the air. Then, a blurry figure appeared like a cloud of mist, and stood in front of Nyetian. "Blood Soul Ancestor," Nyetian exclaimed as he stared at the figure in front of him. Chapter 37:14. The Blood Soul, Maze, Nyetian's eyes narrowed when he heard Ancestor Blood Soul's words. His expression did not look too good. Ancestor Blood Soul told him that he was the most suitable person for the Three Souls' profound heart. This was undoubtedly indicating that he wanted to give the Three Souls' profound heart to him. Although he had already guessed that he would die of exhaustion, he was still very surprised when Ancestor Blood Soul told him so directly. What made him uneasy was that Ancestor Blood Soul did not show his real body. Instead, he kept meeting him in this way. He could not see any sincerity from him. After experiencing countless life and death situations, he maintained his vigilance against everyone. He did not know how strong Ancestor Blood Soul was, but he knew people's hearts. Once a warrior had great power, they would never give it up easily. Even he would not give the Star Origin Stone or the Heart of the Sky to that person, no matter how much he valued someone. Not only was Ancestor Blood Soul the leader of the Blood Soul sect, but he also ruled the entire underworld. It was not wrong to say that he was the ruler of a sacred world. Was it possible for someone of such status to give his most important thing to a stranger? Nyetian also heard another piece of information from Ancestor Blood Soul's words. The Blood Soul in his body was indeed not simple. It seemed that the Blood Soul was a power that could grow. The speed of growth in Nyetian's body was beyond Ancestor Blood Soul's expectations. "You really are Ancestor Blood Soul." Nyetian looked at the blurry figure in front of him. He was very calm and said with a faint smile, "Nyetian, your mental fortitude is even stronger than I thought." Ancestor Blood Soul smiled strangely and said, "You must be wondering why so many Blood Soul beasts have been attracted. So these giant beasts are Blood Soul beasts." Nyetian's eyes narrowed. He smiled and said, "If I'm not wrong, these Blood Soul beasts are under your control." "Yes." Ancestor Blood Soul did not deny it. He nodded and explained, "The Blood Soul beast came to you because the Blood Soul aura in your body is too strong. It really is the Bloody Soul." Nyetian squinted his eyes and exclaimed at his heart. He had a feeling that the Blood Soul that they had fused with before entering the path of Blood Soul would not be simple. Now, it seemed that he had guessed correctly. The Blood Soul grew in his body and became stronger and stronger. Hence, its aura became more intense and attracted countless Blood Soul beasts. It even caused a beast tide. "Is this how you test the Blood Soul warriors?" Nyetian's mouth twitched as he asked solemnly. "Sort of." The Blood Soul Ancestor smiled faintly and said, "Actually, the Blood Soul is very useful. It guarantees that the Blood Soul warrior will not be harmed by the special mental pressure of the Blood Soul Road." "Really?" Nyetian laughed and said, "I think the Blood Soul's function isn't limited to this, right? You will understand the power of the Blood Soul more and more clearly." Ancestor Blood Soul also smiled, but his tone became somewhat strange, as if he was hiding something. "I want to know, how can I see your real body?" Nyetian's eyes darkened as he continued to ask. He wanted to see the Blood Soul Ancestor and ask him to save Lan Zhuiying. "Nyetian, your Blood Soul is growing too fast. I have to do something in advance." The Blood Soul Ancestor laughed strangely again and said, "As long as you can pass the Blood Soul test, you will naturally be able to see me." "Huh?" Nyetian's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed in surprise. Then, a map appeared in his divine sense. "This is the map of the Blood Soul Road. The brightest spot you see is the core of the Blood Soul Road, the Blood Soul Maze." The Blood Soul Ancestor said with a smile, "I will wait for you in the Blood Soul Maze. I hope you will not disappoint me." As soon as he finished speaking, Nyetian's divine sense trembled, and he directly came out of the spiritual space. In front of him, there was a Blood Soul beast. It was very calm and not as violent as before. At this moment, Nyetian realized that the Blood Soul beasts around him had calmed down. Their bloodshot eyes were very calm and not as violent as before. Blood Soul Maze. The corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched, and there was a hint of malice in his eyes. Boom! In the next moment, he stepped out and released his sword aura. The void rumbled, and the heaven and earth shook. The blood soul beasts felt the terrifying aura and immediately fled. These blood soul beasts had already returned to normal and new to fear experts. Nyetian smiled faintly and did not stay any longer. He directly followed the map in his divine sense and headed towards the Blood Soul Maze. The Blood Soul Maze was located in the core of the Blood Soul Road and was at least 10,000 miles away from Nyetian. At this moment, Nyetian finally realized that the entire Blood Soul Road was actually so vast that it was comparable to a domain. It was hard to imagine that a small, three-soul mystic heart could actually nurture such a huge thing. This made Nyetian even more curious about what kind of power the 9 hearts of heaven and earth was. Nyetian's speed was very fast. After 10 minutes, his figure appeared in the mountain range outside the Blood Soul Maze. After this mountain range, it will be the Blood Soul Maze. Looking at the mountain range in front of him, Nyetian smiled faintly. He took a deep breath and prepared to enter the mountain range. At this moment, he suddenly felt a familiar aura. He could not help but smile and murmured, "He is still alive." Then, he turned to look into the distance, and a familiar face appeared. It was Qinling, and Changli were the 2 teammates that Nyetian had just entered the Blood Soul Road. He did not expect that with Qinling's strength, he could still live until now. There was a blood soul in a blood soul warrior's body. The blood soul beast followed the aura of the blood soul and chased after the blood soul warrior. Qinling's strength was not strong. The fact that he could survive until now was indeed a surprise to Nyetian. Nyetian. At this moment, Qinling also noticed Nyetian. However, his eyes trembled and his voice was trembling as if he had seen something very terrifying. "Qinling, what's wrong?" Nyetian was stunned for a moment. He could not help but frown and ask in shock, Don't kill me, don't kill me." Qinling's face was pale and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His figure could not help but retreat. It was obvious that he was very frightened. Seeing Qinling's appearance, Nyetian could not help but frown. Suddenly, he thought of something and his expression changed. He took a step forward and asked, "Qinling, have you seen me before?" At this moment, Nyetian thought of another person, Dark Nyetian. Qinling must have seen Dark Nyetian and mistook the latter for Nyetian. That was why he was so afraid. "Lord Nyetian, you have already killed so many people. Please don't kill me anymore." Qinling's body was drenched in cold sweat. His eyes were trembling as he pleaded bitterly. "So there's still a fish that escaped the net." At this moment, a low voice sounded in the void and said cold, "The one who killed people is not Nyetian. It's me." Hearing the low voice behind him, Qinling's face suddenly froze and he instinctively turned around. The face that entered his eyes caused his pupils to shrink and his entire body to freeze. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't make a single sound. Chapter 37:15. You just have to kill someone. When Qinling saw another Nyetian appear behind him, he was dumbfounded. He was petrified on the spot and could not react for a long time. Upon seeing Dark Nyetian, Nyetian's expression flickered and his pupils constricted. "You're still alive." He had already guessed that Dark Nyetian was most likely still alive, but when he saw the latter again, he was still surprised. "Nyetian, if you don't die, how can I bear to die?" Dark Nyetian smiled coldly. His eyes, which were like the abyss, seemed even darker. An eerie aura filled the void, and the world seemed to be covered with a thick layer of darkness. At that time, he had been blasted into a space-time crack by Nyetian. However, he had inherited the power of the supreme demonic fire from Nyetian. Relying on the space-time shield and his powerful martial body, he had forcibly torn the void and survived. Who are you?" At this moment, Qinling finally had a slight reaction. His eyes trembled incessantly as he looked at Nyetian in the darkness with extreme shock, and he asked with a trembling voice. Until now, he still didn't understand why there were 2 Nyetians. However, he could faintly discern that the 2 Nyetians didn't seem to be the same. The Nyan he was looking at right now seemed to have an even darker aura, and a pair of eyes emitted a dense cold light. That kind of dark and austere aura caused one to tremble with fear. The other Nyetian was more like the Nyetian he knew. When he first saw Nyetian, the reason why he was so frightened was because he had seen Dark Nyetian kill other Blood Soul Martialists with his own eyes. He mistook Nyetian for Dark Nyetian, which was why he was so afraid. At this moment, he seemed to have understood something, and he became even more afraid. I'm Nyetan. In the dark, Nyetian's eyes were incomparably sinister and filled with killing intent. He stared at Qin Ling coldly and actually walked over step by step. What are you doing? Qin Ling suddenly felt the aura in the surrounding space change. A ghastly energy was released and tightly enveloped him, causing him to practically be unable to breathe. He couldn't help but be frightened to the point his face turned ghastly pale as he asked in shock, "Don't kill him." Upon seeing this scene, Nyetian's expression couldn't help but turn grim. At the same time, a pair of astral wings appeared behind his back as the sky sword appeared in his hands. Of course, he knew that Dark Nyetian wanted to kill Qin Ling. You don't want me to kill them, but I will. Darkness Nyetian didn't even turn around as he spoke coldly. Suddenly, a tremendous dark aura was released from his body. The killing intent in his eyes was extremely sharp, as if he was a devil that had just walked out of hell. Bang! In the next instant, a dark hand appeared in the void and directly grabbed towards Qin Ling. Qin Ling screamed in fear, but after that, he couldn't make any sound. His body trembled, and under the situation where he didn't even have the chance to resist, he directly exploded and died. Darkness Nyetian's strength was even more terrifying than Nyetian's. In front of him, a cultivator like Qin Ling couldn't resist at all. You deserve to die. Nyetian was in midair. The bloody scene in front of him caused his eyes to tremble. With a low roar, the sword aura in his body instantly rose to the extreme. Nyetian, don't you want to save people? But I insist on killing them. Darkness Nyetian laughed coldly. His body was surging with demonic chi, and his eyes were extremely dark. Boom! However, at this moment, before Nyetian could make a move, a tremendous force appeared in another void, causing the void to sink. After that, the shadow of a palm appeared, rolling and violent, directly pressing towards the darkness. The sudden sneak attack caused Darkness Nyetian's eyes to narrow slightly, but there was no trace of panic on his face. Instead, he sneered, and then a dark demonic sword appeared in his hand. He slashed out with the sword, and the shadow of the sword whistled out like a wild beast. Bang! After that, the palm and the sword collided, and there was an explosion in the void. The shadow of the palm and the sword collapsed at the same time, turning into an endless violent force that surged in the void. At this moment, a familiar figure appeared in the sky. It was Zhou Wudi. Zhou Wudi, like Nyetian, was a blood soul cultivator from the Yin City. However, he represented the 3 Yin Temple in the path of blood soul. Back in the Yin City, Zhou Wudi wanted to attack Nyetian, but he didn't have a chance. At this moment, he finally found Nyetian and attacked without hesitation. However, he didn't expect that Nyetian would easily block his attack. He didn't realize that his target was wrong. Nyetian, you're stronger than before. Zhou Wudi's figure stood coldly in the void. His eyes were cold and deep, locked onto Darkness Nyetian. He didn't even notice Nyetian's existence. Interesting. Darkness Nyetian glanced at Zhou Wudi and then at Nyetian. He said coldly, Nyetian, it seems that you have a lot of enemies. Nyetian furrowed his eyebrows. Zhou Wudi's sudden appearance was unexpected to him. Nyetian, Zhou Wudi, who was far away in the sky, finally realized that something was wrong. His eyes trembled slightly, and he suddenly saw Nyetian. His expression changed, and he was so shocked that he couldn't say a word. He couldn't believe that he saw 2 Nyetians. Moreover, the aura of the 2 Nyetians was much stronger than before, especially Darkness Nyetian. His aura was very terrifying, and the demonic chi was roaring crazily, as if it wanted to devour everything. Such a strange scene stunned Zhou Wudi for a few seconds before he finally reacted. "Nye Tian, do you think I should kill this guy?" At this moment, darkness Nye Tian twitched the corner of his mouth. His face revealed a gloomy aura, and he asked in an extremely evil manner. "That's your own business," Nye Tianling replied coldly. He glanced at Zhou Wudi with indifference. He didn't care about Zhou Wudi's life or death. Darkness Nye Tian killed him in the end. However, Zhou Wudi was not a fool. You should soon find out something. It seems that you don't care about this person, and there's no point for him to live. Darkness Nye Tian smiled coldly, and then a cold light flashed in his eyes. The dark demonic sword suddenly stabbed out, and a huge amount of demonic qi surged out. The overwhelming aura was like a dark cloud in the sky, and it shrouded Zhou Wudi. Zhou Wudi's eyes narrowed, and his expression changed. He suddenly shouted in shock. Darkness Nye Tian's aura was too strong. He waved his sword casually, and it made Zhou Wudi feel suffocated. However, he was still calm. His aura surged crazily, and he struck out with his palm. The palm's shadow was like a mountain, and it madly attacked the dark demonic qi. But the next moment, a strange scene happened. The palm's shadow bombarded the surging demonic qi, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. It was directly devoured. What he saw caused Zhou Wudi's face to stiffen, and he shouted in horror. Chapter 37:16. I like being a dog. You? Zhou Wudi was so shocked that his face turned pale. He let out a scream, but before he could say anything, his neck was clamped by a giant hand, and he could not make a sound. "Little lamb, it's your honor to be my prey," Dark Nye Tian said with a cold smile as he clasped Zhou Wudi's neck with his hand, which was like a pair of iron pincers. Zhou Wudi's face instantly turned red. Even his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose were bleeding. He was the leader of the 7 great young masters of the Yin city, and the direct disciple of great Emperor Sanyin. However, he was as weak as a little lamb at this moment, without the slightest ability to retaliate. Dark Nye Tian's strength was unimaginable. When Nye Tian saw this, his eyes could not help but tremble, and his heart was filled with shock. After not seeing him for several days, Dark Nye Tian's strength had increased significantly. It seemed that he wasn't the only one whose strength had skyrocketed. Dark Nye Tian had also become even more terrifying. "Nye Tian, you decide whether he lives or dies." At this time, Dark Nye Tian held Zhou Wudi tightly. He looked at Nye Tian from afar with a playful look in his eyes and said, "I want to see if you, a person who has always wanted to save people, will save your enemy." Nye Tian frowned. His face was gloomy, and he did not speak for a long time. Dark Nye Tian was obviously playing with him. It was a psychological blow. I thought you had the heart of a saint, but it turns out that there is a limit to your tolerance." Dark Nye Tian couldn't help but sneer when he saw Nye Tian's conflicted expression. Nye Tian's current appearance filled him with a sense of satisfaction, as if the world had changed. "Whether you want to kill him or not is your own business. It has nothing to do with me." Nye Tian's eyes darkened as he said coldly, "Is that so?" Dark Nye Tian smiled and said, "It seems that you still want me to kill him, but I won't kill him." Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but sink. He didn't believe that Dark Nye Tian would so easily let go of someone who ambushed him. "However, since he ambushed me, I have to give him a little punishment so that he will remember me." As expected, Dark Nye Tianling sneered. He stared at Zhou Wudi with his eerie eyes and said, "Kid, I'll give you a small gift." "You?" Zhou Wudi's eyes trembled. He felt the dark aura approaching him, but he could not resist at all. "Humph." The corners of Dark Nye Tian's mouth curled up into a sinister smile. Then, 2 celestial demon marks emerged from his palms and entered Zhou Wudi's body through his eyes. Then, the 2 divine demon marks appeared on Zhou Wudi's face. They were like 2 marks that were engraved on his face. Dark Nye Tian smiled and let go of Zhou Wudi. He looked at Zhou Wudi as if he was admiring his own work. He couldn't help but smile and said, "Not bad. These 2 inverse divine demon marks are enough to give you a surprise." Zhou Wudi got rid of the control, but he looked even more panicked. His eyes were trembling. He felt that there were two extremely evil forces surging in his body. They were like two strange hands that were going to tear his martial body and divine soul apart. What did you do to me? Zhou Wudi's eyes trembled. He looked at dark Nietian in fear, and his voice became sharp and ear-piercing. I just gave you a small gift. Dark Nietian Lung smiled coldly and said, if you don't want to die, be my dog. Bite whoever your master tells you to bite. Do you understand? Zhou Wudi's eyes were trembling. He was obviously scared and did not know what to say. What? Didn't you understand me? Dark Nietian's face darkened. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Zhou Wudi was so scared that his body trembled and his face turned pale. Who would have thought that the leader of the 7 sons of the Yin city, the disciple of the great Emperor Sanin, would be so scared? Master is talking to you. How are you going to respond? Dark Nietian smiled coldly and said in a low voice, Yes, master. I know I'm wrong. Zhou Wudi could feel the murderous intent in Dark Nietian's eyes. His eyes trembled and then he nodded. He looked like a slave. Very good. You're a fast learner. Dark Nietian smiled and suddenly glanced at Nietian. He wanted to see how Nietian would react. Nietian looked at the scene in front of him. His eyes narrowed and his face darkened. He did not like Zhou Wudi at all. Moreover, there was a deep grudge between the two of them. However, when he saw Zhou Wudi kneeling in front of Dark Nietian, he did not feel happy at all. Instead, he felt disgusted. Zhou Wudi was a martial arts genius. How could he be willing to be humiliated like this? Perhaps, no matter how arrogant and domineering some people appeared on the surface, they were still slaves in their bones. At that moment, Nietian was not paying attention to Zhou Wudi. He was paying attention to how Dark Nietian had used the 2 inverse Godfiend marks to control Zhou Wudi. He did not know that the inverse Godfiend marks could be used in this way. Obviously, Dark Nietian's understanding of the Godfiend origin embryo was much deeper than his. Dark Nietian raised his eyebrows and looked at Nietian provocatively. He smiled and said, Nietian, what do you think of my dog? Some people like to be dogs. It has nothing to do with me, Nietian said cold. So, do you still want to attack me now? Dark Nietian said with a faint smile. Nietian's eyes darkened. Just as he was about to speak, he felt a familiar aura approaching. 2 Nietians. This is interesting. Then a cold voice was heard in the void. Then a figure appeared in the sky. Nietian's eyes narrowed as he turned to look up into the sky and shouted, Thousand Blade Breaker. The person who had appeared was none other than Duan Qianren. In the first level, Duan Qianren had pretended to help Nietian, but Nietian had seen through him. In the end, he had been killed by the 7 Death Sky Echoes. Of course, that level was just an illusion, so Duan Qianren had not really died. However, the enmity between him and Nietian had been established. The blood soul in Nietian's body was growing too fast. Blood Soul Ancestor had no choice but to open the Blood Soul maze in advance. All the Blood Soul martialists who were still alive were heading towards the Blood Soul maze. Nietian, we meet again. Duan Qianren looked at Nietian. His eyes were extremely gloomy and filled with killing intent. His eyes moved between Nietian and Dark Nietian. He was not too surprised. He was just a little curious. Chapter 37:17. Chapter 37:12. A better fit, Duan Qianren. It seems like you have a deep grudge against me. Nietian stared at Duan Qianren in the sky and smiled. If you hand over the zither of 7 absolutes, perhaps we can become friends. Duan Qianren laughed and swept his gaze over Dark Nietian. I can even help you deal with this guy who looks exactly like you. Nietian's eyes narrowed, but he sneered and said, Unfortunately, I don't trust you. Duan Qianren was a hypocrite. His words were not worth trusting. Moreover, Nietian did not think that Duan Qianren would be a threat to Dark Nietian. Duan Qianren's expression sank. His eyes flickered with a cold, killing intent. Then I can only join hands with this guy to kill you first. The guy he was referring to was Dark Nietian. This guy was truly sinister. After failing to join hands with Nietian, he turned around and expressed his goodwill to Dark Nyetian. Humph, Dark Nyetian sneered Cold. A mere piece of trash isn't qualified to join hands with me. You. Duan Qianren frowned, his expression extremely unsightly. He was someone with a divine soul bloodline, so he could distinguish between Nyetian and Dark Nyetian at a glance. However, he did not expect that Dark Nyetian did not put him in his eyes at all. Brat, if you're interested in being my dog, I can consider it. Dark Nyetian laughed and said in a loud voice, You're courting death. Duan Qianren's eyes trembled, and he was instantly enraged. With a low roar, his entire body's aura was released like a storm. Waves of terrifying energy stirred the void, and a hurricane appeared in the sky, roaring and violently pressuring Dark Nyetian. Humph! Dark Nyetian felt the violent pressure, but he was not afraid in the slightest. Instead, he sneered and slashed out with a demonic sword in his hand. The sword shadow was like a giant beast of darkness, directly facing the hurricane. Rumble. Bang! In the next instant, the two terrifying forces collided together, causing the entire space to sink. After that, boundless waves of energy gushed out in all directions, wanting to engulf everything in their path. Duan Qianren suddenly felt the terrifying pressure of the devil chi. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he cried out in alarm. His figure frantically retreated several thousand meters away, and only then did he manage to stabilize himself. On the other hand, Dark Nyetian was as steady as a rock, not moving an inch. With a single move, it was clear who was superior. Duan Qianren, who possessed the God Soul bloodline, was no match for Dark Nyetian. Is this all you've got? Dark Nyetianling sneered. His insolence revealed a peerless dominance. Duan Qianren's face was gloomy, and his eyes were slightly trembling. His chest felt like it was being pressed down by a huge boulder, making it hard for him to breathe or speak. He didn't expect Dark Nyetian's strength to be so terrifying, even stronger than Nyetian's. He originally thought that Dark Nyetian was only a part of Nyetian's God Soul, so it was impossible for him to inherit all of Nyetian's power. But now, it seemed that things weren't as simple as he had imagined. Duan Qianren, if you don't want to die, then don't provoke him. At this time, Nyetianling coldly spoke from afar, giving Duan Qianren a piece of advice. Nyetian, what the hell are you doing? Duan Qianren gloomily looked at Nyetian and asked in a cold voice. The corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched, and he no longer paid attention to Duan Qianren. Nyetian, now is not the time for us to fight to the death. Dark Nyetian didn't seem to have any interest in Duan Qianren. He looked at Nyetian from afar and said, But our battle won't end here. Between you and me, only one of us can walk the path of blood souls. Good. I look forward to the moment of our duel. Nyetian replied cold with a slightly gloomy gaze. He knew that it was almost impossible for him to kill Dark Nyetian now. The latter's strength was just too strong, especially now that Zhou Wudi was by Nyetian's side. More importantly, Nyetian wanted to learn more about the demon god Nascent Embryo's secrets from Nyetian. Very good. It's rare for us to have a common understanding. Dark Nyetian laughed. His figure immediately moved, heading towards the Blood Soul Labyrinth. Nyetian looked at Dark Nyetian's figure and let out a long breath. In front of the latter, he actually felt like he couldn't breathe. At this time, he realized that there were more and more martial artists around him. Obviously, they were all heading towards the Blood Soul Labyrinth. He didn't stop and headed towards the Blood Soul Labyrinth with everyone else. Very soon, everyone passed through the mountain range and arrived outside a huge city wall. The city wall was like a continuous mountain range. It was thousands of miles long and extremely high. It actually reached into the clouds, and the top could not be seen. Standing outside the huge city wall, Nyetian felt like there was a giant standing proudly in front of him. Immediately, he felt the aura of a formation coming from the city wall. He immediately understood. It was obvious that this city wall was the outer barrier of the Blood Soul Labyrinth. It was protected by a strong formation. However, the strange thing was that he didn't see any doors on the city wall. He didn't know where the entrance to the Blood Soul Labyrinth was. He wasn't in a hurry and waited outside the city wall. At this time, more and more martial artists gathered outside the city wall. Many people couldn't hold back anymore. Some actually attacked the city wall. However, the city wall was indestructible. All the attacks landed on the city wall and directly shattered. Nietian looked around. There were roughly over 100 martial artists present. This should be all the survivors. Everyone looked at the city wall in front of them and couldn't help discussing. What kind of ghost wall is this? Why isn't there a door? Is the Blood Soul Labyrinth inside the city wall? Ancestor Blood Soul didn't lead us here just to make us wait, right? What the hell is Ancestor Blood Soul doing? Why are all the tests of the Blood Soul path so strange? The crowd clamored endlessly. Clearly, they were already very dissatisfied with Ancestor Blood Soul. And at this time, inside the city wall, a pair of incomparably sinister eyes were secretly locked on all the martial artists, as if observing something. This pair of eyes swept over the Blood Soul Path martial artists one by one. In the end, there were only 3 people who caught his attention: Niet Tian, Dark Niet Tian, and Duan Xianren. After a long time, the owner of this pair of eyes opened his mouth and muttered, "That soul-severing clan brat's talent is pretty good. His divine soul bloodline is also very strong. He's a pretty good reserve candidate. The one who satisfies this ancestor the most is still this brat called Nietian. However, that fellow who looks exactly like him is a variable that this ancestor didn't expect. Seems like this guy is even stronger than Nietian and should be more suitable for the 3-soul profound heart." The owner of this pair of eyes was precisely the owner of the 3-soul profound heart, Ancestor Blood Soul. At this time, he was currently secretly observing just who was the most suitable person for the 3-soul profound heart. Originally, the person he fancied the most was Nietian, but Dark Nietian's appearance made him have a different plan. Chapter 37:18. A fork in the path. Ancestor Blood Soul secretly observed Nietian and the others. His gloomy eyes were filled with unconcealable passion, like a wolf eyeing its prey. He suddenly felt that Dark Nietian was more suitable for the 3-soul's mystic heart than Nietian. However, compared to Nietian, Dark Nietian had a problem. He did not have a blood soul in his body. This was very bad news for Ancestor Blood Soul. Of course, the person that I have my eyes on must be the best. Ancestor Blood Soul's eyes narrowed slightly. A strange light flickered in his eyes as he stared at Dark Nietian. His eyes were burning with passion. He had not given up yet. He would find a way to inject the Blood Soul into Dark Nietian's body. Outside the huge city wall, the Blood Soul warriors were already impatient. Many of them could not hold back and even began to curse. Nietian seemed very calm as he looked at the crowd. After the previous 2 trials, he already knew that there was no need to be anxious in the path of Blood Soul. It was useless to be anxious. In the path of Blood Soul, Ancestor Blood Soul was the supreme existence. He controlled everything and the entire world revolved around him. At this moment, Nietian's eyes were a little strange. His face was tense, and he seemed nervous. Vaguely, he felt that there was a pair of evil eyes observing them in the dark. It made him feel very uncomfortable. Whoosh! At this moment, an invisible force suddenly gushed out from the huge city wall and spread across the void. Like a huge ripple, it swept across everyone. At this moment, everyone felt their spiritual souls tremble. It was as if an invisible giant hand had grabbed at their spiritual space. Everyone's eyes trembled. They were shocked and immediately quietened down. Such strong mental strength. Nietian's eyes narrowed. He was secretly shocked. His mental strength was already very strong. However, when the mental strength swept across, he felt a deep sense of helplessness and despair. He could only let the mental strength circulate in his spiritual space. Fortunately, this mental power only swept past, as if it was trying to probe something. Look! At this moment, someone suddenly discovered something and couldn't help but point at the city wall and exclaim, "The city wall is cracking." Everyone immediately reacted and cried out in alarm, their expressions extremely horrified. Tian squinted his eyes and saw that two cracks had appeared on the wall. The cracks were neat and smooth, as if they had been cut by a sharp blade. Then, a strange scene appeared. The two cracks on the wall actually moved and sunk inward. A dark passage appeared on the wall. Everyone looked at the passageway on the wall, and their eyes could not help but tremble. After a long time, someone calmed down slightly and asked in surprise, "Is this the passageway to the Blood Soul Maze?" At this moment, everyone's gazes were extremely strange. They wanted to enter the tunnel, but they didn't dare to. They looked as though they were itching to give it a try. The passageway on the wall was too strange. It seemed to have been forcefully caved in, with no end in sight. Tian was not anxious. Instead, he carefully sensed the passage, not daring to be careless. He sensed a faint fluctuation of divine soul in the passage, but there was nothing else out of the ordinary. This must be the entrance to the Blood Soul Maze. Let's enter. After a long time, someone finally couldn't help but take a step forward, preparing to enter the passage. "Step aside, I'll go first." At this time, a low and domineering voice resounded. Then a figure stepped forward, his entire body surging with a strange aura. His entire body flickered in the void and directly entered the passage. Who is this? Everyone's eyes trembled and their expressions changed as they cried out in shock. "It's this guy." Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the figure. He faintly smiled and murmured, "It seems that he has already confirmed that there's nothing wrong with this passage." This figure was none other than Duan Qianren, who possessed the divine soul bloodline. Duan Qianren was a gloomy and arrogant person. He was definitely not a fool. Since he dared to enter the passage, he must have sensed it beforehand. Seeing that there was nothing strange after Duan Qianren entered the passage, everyone immediately relaxed and followed him into the passage. Tian was not in a hurry. He walked at the back of the crowd. The passage was extremely wide, enough for over 100 Blood Soul cultivators to walk side by side. However, the Blood Soul cultivators were very strong, so every cultivator maintained a certain distance from each other. The moment Tian entered the passage, he immediately felt a strange divine soul power surge in the space. It actually caused the blood soul within his body to become active. Looks like the divine soul power in this space is the same kind of divine soul power as the blood soul power. His eyes narrowed slightly as he thought to himself. Apart from the blood soul becoming a little active, there was nothing else abnormal. Afterward, everyone slowly advanced into the passage. In the blink of an eye, they had traveled several thousand meters. Could it be that the wall just now was several thousand meters thick? Tian could not help but be astonished. He had personally seen that the passage they were in was a depression in the wall. The length of the passage should be the thickness of the wall. If the wall was actually several thousand meters thick, then it would truly be indestructible. Perhaps even a legendary sacred ancestor powerhouse might not be able to destroy a wall that was several thousand meters thick and stabilized by a powerful array formation. The path has diverged. At this time, a cry suddenly came from the front, causing the crowd to immediately stop. Tian raised his head and looked forward. It turned out that the end of the passage had split into two paths. Everyone stopped one after another. They were momentarily at a loss as to which path they should take. Two paths. This made everyone subconsciously think that one led to life and the other led to death. Tian walked forward and swept his eyes over the two paths. He spread out his divine sense in an attempt to find some clues. However, these two paths were like mirror images. They were completely the same, without the slightest difference. This caused him to involuntarily frown. He inadvertently glanced at Duan Qianren. The latter was a bloodline cultivator. Perhaps he could discover something. At this time, Duan Qianren was actually also looking at Tian. His eyes faintly flickered, and he strangely smiled, saying, "Tian, you choose first." Tian's eyes slightly narrowed. Duan Qianren seemed to be scheming something bad. But after thinking for a moment, he faintly smiled and directly stepped into one of the paths. Duan Qianren was stunned. He didn't think that Nietian would be so decisive. Immediately, the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile as he said in his heart, Nietian, since you've made your choice, then I'll choose the other path. This time, let's see who will win. With that said, he directly turned around and walked into the other path. He had deliberately chosen a different path from Nietian in order to win against Nietian this time. Chapter 37:19. A strange Maze Duan Shinran was determined to obtain the Tri-Soul Mystic Heart, but he did not know that he was merely a backup in the eyes of the Blood Soul Ancestor. Nietian walked forward along a passageway. There were not many Blood Soul Ancestor following behind him, only a dozen or so. It seemed like the majority of the Blood Soul Ancestor trusted Duan Shinran more. Even Dark Nietian and Zhou Wudi took the same passageway as Duan Shinran. Nietian did not panic in his heart. The fewer people behind him, the more relaxed he was. Even he could not distinguish the difference between the two passageways. Therefore, such a test was a little too difficult. All the Blood Soul Ancestor basically chose a passageway randomly. Nietian believed that the Blood Soul Ancestor would not test the Blood Soul Ancestor randomly. Therefore, at this moment, he felt that there was no difference between the two passageways. They only separated the Blood Soul Ancestor. Following that, he continued walking along the passageway in front of him. Roughly several kilometers later, the passageway branched off again. The situation was exactly the same as before. Nietian could not help frowning, his expression somewhat strange. He sensed the two passageways very carefully, not daring to make the slightest mistake. But the strange thing was, he still could not see any difference between the two passageways. The other Blood Soul Ancestor cultivators were even more puzzled. Some were even starting to panic. Nietian stopped for a long time. He used many methods to probe the two passageways, but still could not discover any difference. In the end, he could only choose one passageway and continue walking forward. Most of the Blood Soul Ancestor cultivators behind him followed him. Only a few people took the other passageway. However, what happened next made the entire maze seem even weirder. Every few kilometers, Nietian and the others would reach the end of the passageway and then split into two identical passageways. Nietian did not waste time. He directly chose a passageway and continued walking. In this way, after a dozen or so forks, only one Blood Soul Ancestor remained beside him. In the Blood Soul maze, the Blood Soul Martialists naturally wanted to have others by their side. That way, they would feel more at ease. However, after countless forks, everyone seemed to have entered an endless loop, which would undoubtedly wear down everyone's willpower. In the end, everyone was basically separated. Only an extremely small number of people walked together. Duan Shinran's situation should be the same as mine. The Blood Soul Ancestor seems to be using these forks to separate the Blood Soul martial artists, Nietian speculated as he walked. He faintly had a bad feeling. It seemed like the Blood Soul maze before him wasn't as simple as it seemed. Following that, the other Blood Soul cultivator followed Nietian through several forks in the road. Finally, he could not endure it any longer and parted ways with Nietian. After Nietian entered a passageway, he discovered that there was no one around him. His expression changed. He had a premonition that something was about to happen. He slowly walked forward along the tunnel, appearing to be extremely careful. The tunnel wasn't straight, but curved, so he didn't know how long it was. After walking for a few thousand meters, Nietian finally saw the end of the tunnel. However, he couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise as his expression changed. He discovered that the end of the tunnel wasn't a fork this time. It was sealed. In the next instant, Nietian suddenly thought of something. His expression changed as he exclaimed, "Oh no!" Rumble. Before he could finish his sentence, a deep rumble was heard. Suddenly, a massive fluctuation was emitted from the surrounding void. Nietian's expression changed as he turned around, wanting to rush out. However, when he turned around, he actually saw a moving wall. The wall was moving very quickly, closing in on him and sealing off his path. Damn it! When Nietian felt the pressure of the space being compressed, he let out a low roar. The sky sword appeared in his hand, and he slashed out. Bang! The shadow of the sword whistled like a dragon, and a terrifying power was released in an instant. It directly bombarded the wall and shattered it. There wasn't even the slightest crack on the wall. These walls were the same as the huge wall from before. They were protected by the power of a formation and were indestructible. Nietion's eyes darkened, and his expression suddenly became very ugly. Then he suddenly raised his head and stomped his feet hard. His figure soared into the sky, wanting to escape from above. Rumble. However, at that moment, he heard a terrifying roar coming from above him. Then, a huge wall appeared and fell straight down, completely sealing off the space above him. Nietion's expression changed as he felt the enormous pressure coming from above him. He had no choice but to land. At that moment, the walls in front and above him were closing in on him at an extremely fast speed, causing his range of movement to shrink rapidly. Am I going to be crushed to death by these walls? Nietion's figure retreated as he thought to himself. He had experienced countless moments of life and death. If he were to die under these walls today, it would be too unjust. However, with his current strength, he couldn't break these walls at all. It seemed that he was in a hopeless situation. Rumble. At that moment, the surrounding walls were closing in at an extremely fast speed, and the void was being squeezed tighter and tighter. Nietion felt the terrifying pressure coming from all directions, as if it was going to crush his martial body. Damn it, he growled once again. The clear sky, sword thrusting straight out, the sword intent surging wildly, the sword blade directly piercing the wall, a burst of sparks flying. However, the wall was extremely hard. Even the sword body of the sky, sword could not tear the slightest crack. Am I really going to die here? Nietion's eyes trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but panic in his heart. At that moment, he had already prepared for the worst. If there was really no other way, he would temporarily hide in the Nine Extremities. At least he could save his life. However, if the space here was completely sealed, space-time would inevitably be in a highly compressed state. If Nietion hid in the Nine Extremities, he would not be able to open the Nine Extremities. The space-time fluctuation of the Nine Extremities was far from enough to open these walls. If that happened, Nietion would probably stay in the Nine Extremities forever and would never be able to come out again. Therefore, until the last moment, Nietion would not enter the Nine Extremities. He recalled the scene when he met Ancestor Bloodsoul. The latter was very optimistic about him and would probably not use this method to kill him. After a while, the surrounding walls were very close to Nietion. The range of his movement became very small, and it was even difficult for him to fully stretch his body. Nietion. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard. He was very nervous. If Nietion did not hide in the Nine Extremities, he would not have a chance anymore. Wait a little longer. Nietion's eyes trembled, and he growled in a low voice. Chapter 37:20. Blood Nietion saw the wall in front of him and stopped in his tracks. His eyes trembled as he screamed. It stopped. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat. His forehead was covered in beads of sweat, and his face was pale. He had survived the ordeal in the blink of an eye. That was close. He let out a long sigh and stared at the wall in front of him with lingering fear. If the wall had been any closer, he would have been squashed to death. After a long while, Nietion finally calmed down. What on earth are these walls used for? Nietion couldn't help but furrow his eyebrows as he scanned the walls around him. He did not understand why the Bloodsoul ancestor would use these strange walls to trap him but not kill him. He believed that the other Bloodsoul martial artists were in the same situation. What was the Bloodsoul ancestor trying to do? What was his goal? Whoosh! Just as Nietion was deep in thought, a strange scene occurred. The wall in front of him suddenly flashed with a bright light, following which lines of light appeared and spread across the wall like some kind of blood-colored runes. Nietion was stunned by the scene before him, and he couldn't help but frown as he stared fixedly at the blood-red talisman. The blood rune was like crimson blood. It emitted a strange light that flowed across the wall. Moments later, the blood rune covered the walls. The narrow space was filled with a crimson light, which made the atmosphere even more eerie. Nietion sensed the blood rune. He lowered his eyes and had an ugly expression. The blood-red rune didn't look special, but it contained an extremely terrifying power. Moreover, the blood rune was different from the blood soul rune. Its aura was more complicated. Not only did it contain ordinary power, but it also contained a powerful mental strength. Nyetian, these blood runes are very strange. Be careful. The Ghost Emperor's voice rang out. His tone was strange, as if he was very nervous and worried about something. Nyetian nodded, but in the next moment his expression changed. He suddenly felt that the blood soul in his body had become unusually active and even violent. It was like a wild beast crazily attacking his body. What happened? The sudden tearing pain caused Nyetian to be extremely shocked. His eyes trembled as he stared fixedly at the blood-red rune in front of him. He knew that it was the aura of these blood-colored runes that caused the blood soul to go berserk. At the next moment, a strange scene happened. The blood-colored runes on the wall detached from the wall and instantly surged into the space, enveloping Nyetian. Nyetian suddenly felt his divine soul tremble, and his expression changed in shock. Immediately after, countless blood-colored runes wrapped around him and burrowed into his body like maggots in a bone. These runes want to enter my body. Nyetian immediately reacted. His face sank, and he cried out in alarm. Immediately, he manipulated the 9 dragon veins, and terrifying dragon chi gushed out in an attempt to drive the blood-colored runes away. However, the blood-colored runes were not afraid of the dragon chi at all. Instead, they began to devour it even more violently. Damn it, Nyetian growled and unleashed the power of the stars. Like a tsunami, the power of the stars surged out and attacked the blood-colored runes. Under the impact of the power of the stars, the blood-colored runes loosened a little, but moments later, they surged towards Nyetian again. What kind of power is this rune? Even the power of the stars cannot drive it away. Nyetian's eyes trembled and his expression was ugly. Just then, the power of the blood soul in his body suddenly gathered and formed a vortex of the blood soul. It was extremely strange. Nyetian was startled by this sudden change, and his expression froze. After the vortex of the blood soul was formed, the blood-colored runes became even more active. Like a brand, they continuously penetrated into Nyetian's body. Shackles of the heavenly path break. Nyetian frowned and decisively used the shackles of the heavenly path. Waves of the heavenly path surged and forcefully stopped the invasion of the blood-colored runes. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt like his entire body was about to be torn apart. Excruciating pain spread throughout his body, and he couldn't help but scream in agony. The battle between the blood-colored runes and the heavenly path created a strong impact inside his body. As the two forces collided, a terrifying force directly attacked his martial physique. However, Nyetian did not give up. Instead, he unleashed the heavenly path's strength even more violently. He would not allow the blood-colored runes to invade his body. Crack, crack, crack. However, at this moment, the battle between the two forces became even more intense. Nyetian's martial physique was unable to resist it. Cracking sounds came from his body as his flesh and meridians were directly torn apart. Nyetian, stop resisting. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard, and he hurriedly shouted, "You won't be able to withstand it." Nyetian's eyes trembled as he felt the tearing force in his body. Finally, he stopped releasing the heavenly path strength. He could feel that the stronger the heavenly path strength, the stronger the power released by the blood-colored runes. If he continued to resist, the power released by the blood-colored runes would be enough to kill him instantly. The moment he stopped resisting, the terrifying blood-colored runes directly entered his body and instantly gathered in the blood-soul vortex. Nyetian's expression changed. He had no idea what the blood-colored runes were for when they gathered in the blood-soul vortex. However, he had a strong premonition that something terrible was about to happen. Boom! At that moment, after absorbing all of the magical symbols, the blood-soul vortex actually started to expand at an alarming rate. Waves of terrifying power crashed into Niet Tion's body like raging waves, filling his entire body in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Niet Tion felt that every part of his body was being restrained by a strange force. It was as if his entire body had been imprisoned. His expression changed as he tried to activate the 9 dragon veins. However, he was shocked to find that the 9 dragon veins were tightly restrained and could not release any power at all. Oh no! His heart sank as he screamed in shock. Following this, an even more terrifying scene took place. In the blink of an eye, the blood-soul force in Niet Tion's body was activated. It instantly turned into streaks of runes that locked all the meridians in his body, rendering him completely immobile. The shocking scene caused his pupils to shrink as his face revealed an unconcealable fear. Chapter 37:21. Chapter 37:16. Blood Soul devouring Niet Tion's face was filled with terror and his eyes were trembling. He could feel that the power of the Blood Soul vortex was constantly increasing, and a vast aura was slowly awakening. What aura is this? His entire body was imprisoned by the blood-colored runes. He was shocked and terrified. At this moment, he felt a trace of despair that was slowly drowning him. Soul devouring. Just then, the Ghost Emperor seemed to have sensed something, and his face changed as he screamed. Soul devouring? Niet Tion was taken aback, and his eyes narrowed. Boom! Just as he finished speaking, the blood-soul vortex suddenly trembled strangely. Then, a terrifying force was released. Like a surging flood, it instantly rushed out and filled his entire body. The sudden change made Niet Tion's face change, and he exclaimed in his heart. At this moment, the power suddenly became berserk and started to release a terrifying, devouring aura. At this moment, Niet Tion felt his spiritual space being attacked. The devouring force was going to break through his spiritual space and devour his divine soul. In an instant, Niet Tion understood that the force released by the blood-soul vortex was going to devour his divine soul. Enjoy the blood-soul devouring. Suddenly, a deep voice sounded. It was illusory, and no one knew where it came from, but it was like thunder that resounded in Niet Tion's ears. Blood-soul ancestor. When Niet Tion heard this voice, his face changed and his heart trembled. Although the voice sounded illusory, he could still recognize that it was the voice of blood-soul ancestor. Hearing the voice of blood-soul ancestor, Niet Tion instantly understood that the function of the blood soul was to devour the divine soul of a blood soul warrior. From a moment he absorbed the blood soul, he vaguely felt that this blood soul must be extraordinary. However, he did not expect that the blood soul ancestor would actually use it to devour the divine souls of blood soul martial artists. No wonder the blood soul ancestor wanted to use the blood soul maze to separate all the blood soul martial artists, then seal them in a narrow space. Nourish the blood soul with the blood runes, and then use the blood soul to devour the martial artist's divine souls. Niet Tion did not know why the blood soul ancestor used the blood soul ancestor's blood soul to devour a martial artist's divine soul. However, this method was extremely vicious. Devouring the soul was equivalent to directly turning a martial artist into a walking corpse. It was even crueler than directly killing a martial artist. The blood soul ancestor had opened the blood soul road to devour the divine souls of cultivators. It was clear how venomous his heart was. At this moment, Niet Tion was convinced that it was impossible for ancestor blood soul to hand over the three souls' profound heart to others. Boom! At this moment, the devouring power of the blood soul had become even stronger. It was pounding on Niet Tion's spiritual space like a flood or a fierce beast. Rumbling noises could be heard continuously, as if his spiritual space was going to collapse at any time. Damn it! Niet Tion roared in his heart. His whole body was already drenched in cold sweat. Bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His face was extremely ugly and pale like a sheet of paper. However, at this moment, he could not move at all. All the power in his body was imprisoned by the strange blood runes. Boom, boom, boom. Then, the devouring power became stronger and stronger, unceasingly pounding on his spiritual space. Violent rumbling noises filled Niet Tion's body, making him feel as if his soul was being torn apart. Niet Tion, star power. At this time, the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded, reminding Niet Tion. The power of the blood runes was extremely strong. Just now, Niet Tion had used all kinds of powers to prevent this power from invading his spiritual space, but to no avail. Although the heavenly power could restrain the blood runes to a certain extent, it made the blood runes stronger and stronger. The confrontation between the two powers was something that Niet Tion could not bear. Hearing the Ghost Emperor's voice, Niet Tion nodded his head and tried to release the star power. The restriction of the blood runes was extremely strong. Even with the strength of the star origin stone, it was greatly suppressed. The star power was the source of power. However, Niet Tion's understanding of the star power was not deep enough. Therefore, it was impossible for him to break the blood runes with the star power. Even with the strength of the star power, he could not break the blood runes. It was obvious that other martial artists could not break the restriction of the blood runes. Under the restriction of the blood runes, the blood soul martial artist could only watch helplessly as his divine soul was devoured bit by bit. One could imagine the despair he felt. However, although the power of the stars was unable to break through the shackles of the blood-red runes, it slightly weakened the shackles' power. Niet Tion felt the power in his body loosen a little. His tense face became even more unsightly. Next, he must find a way to destroy the blood soul martial artist. The devouring power of the blood soul martial artist was getting stronger and stronger. His divine soul could not withstand it. Squeak! At that moment, Niet Tion's divine soul connected with the fox demon Evernight. The little fox demon let out a cry. Immediately, it realized something and immediately released its strong mind energy. It built a mind energy shield outside of Niet Tion's divine soul space to resist the attack of the devouring power. At that moment, Niet Tion felt his divine soul become much more relaxed. However, the mind energy shield would not last for long. How should he destroy the blood soul martial artist? He felt that the blood soul martial artist was getting stronger and stronger. Moreover, it was still growing. When he first merged with the blood soul martial artist, he felt that the blood soul martial artist contained an extremely terrifying power. Niet Tion, you cannot destroy the blood soul martial artist. The only way is... At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard. He could not hide the nervousness in his voice. What is it? Niet Tion's eyes narrowed as he asked nervously. Take the risk and merge with the blood soul. The Ghost Emperor paused for a long time before he said in a deep voice, Merge with the blood soul? Niet Tion's eyes flickered and his face froze. Of course, he knew that when the Ghost Emperor said merge with the blood soul, he meant to absorb and merge with it. He would not be controlled by the blood soul. However, the power of the blood soul martial artist was so strong. Could he really absorb it? Niet Tion, with your current strength, you are not strong enough to absorb and merge with the blood soul. You can only rely on Lulu. The Ghost Emperor's voice was heard again. Lulu? Niet Tion's eyes narrowed. He had almost forgotten that he had the blood seal of the Saint Soul with him. Previously, Lulu had helped him absorb a lot of violent power. However, the blood soul was different. It was a power that came from the 9 cores of heaven and earth. Moreover, it had an extremely strong devouring power. Could Lulu really withstand such a terrifying power? Chapter 37:22. The ancestor appears. What condition? Niet Tion was stunned. He did not expect Lulu to raise conditions at this moment. I will help you absorb the blood soul. You have to let me go and help me find a suitable place to cultivate. Lulu spoke in a low voice. There was no threat in his tone. In fact, he sounded a little nervous. Sure. Niet Tion agreed without hesitation. Then let's begin. Lulu was pleasantly surprised and said, Most of the blood soul contains spiritual power. I have never absorbed this kind of power before. Niet Tion's eyes narrowed. It seemed like Lulu was not afraid of the blood soul. Instead, he was excited. As soon as Lulu spoke, he began to absorb the Blood Soul's power. Hum! In the next moment, a ball of white light appeared on Yetion's forehead. Then, the huge amount of Blood Soul's power was guided by a force and began to gather at the blood seal of the Saint Spirit. Yetion felt a tearing pain spread through his entire body. The blood-colored magical symbols became violent, as if they were going to tear his body apart inch by inch. However, as the blood runes were going berserk, they were being ripped off bit by bit. Yetion felt the restriction on his body weaken. Lulu can really absorb the Blood Soul's power. The process of absorbing the Blood Soul was much easier than Yetion had expected. His eyes flickered and he was shocked. He did not think that Liolio's ability to absorb the Blood Soul's power would be so strong. It seemed like after Lulu had absorbed the Blood Soul, it did not show any devouring power. Then, in the blink of an eye, the blood runes and the Blood Soul's power were completely absorbed by Lulu. Yetion's eyes narrowed and his face was filled with astonishment. He could not react for a long time. The Blood Soul, which had almost devoured his divine soul, was actually absorbed by Lulu just like that. He could not help but feel that it was somewhat inconceivable. This emperor is the Saint Soul Grass Emperor. The power of the Saint Soul has the most direct effect on the Blood Soul. A mere Blood Soul is nothing to this emperor. Lulu said proudly as he completely absorbed the Blood Soul. Yetion was stunned. It seemed that he had underestimated Liolio's ability. After a while, he calmed down and carefully sensed the martial body. After confirming that the Blood Soul's aura had completely disappeared, he felt much more at ease. Lulu, are you okay? Yetion was still worried and asked Lulu. Of course I'm fine. Lulu smiled proudly and said, Yetion, don't forget your promise. After saying that, Lulu calmed down and stopped talking. Yetion stood rooted to the ground, as if he had been petrified. The Ghost Emperor was also stunned and could not react for a long time. They did not expect the power of the Saint Soul Blood Seal to be this powerful. Yetion then realized that he actually did not know much about the Saint Soul Blood Seal. It seemed that the Saint Soul Blood Seal was related to the Saint Soul tribe of the Ghost Valley, and the Ghost Valley tribe was one of the 4 ancient foreign tribes. To be classified as an ancient foreign tribe, the Saint Soul Ghost Valley should not be that simple. Yetion calmed his emotions, and his expression became much calmer. Although it was unbelievable that the Blood Soul was absorbed by the Saint Soul Blood Seal, it was definitely a good thing for Yetion. However, he still had a problem to solve. He was still trapped in a narrow space. Yetion, look at these walls. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard, filled with unconcealable joy. Yetion frowned, and his expression slightly changed. He immediately noticed that cracks had appeared on the surrounding walls, and the aura of the formation inside the walls seemed to have disappeared. These cracks were left behind by the blood-colored talismans. He immediately reacted and exclaimed in surprise. The cracks on the walls were densely packed, and they were the imprints of the blood-colored talismans from before. A wall like this shouldn't be able to trap me. Yetion's lips curled into a faint smile. Sword intent surged from his body, and a surge of sword aura soared into the sky and slammed into the surrounding walls. Boom! The walls did not crumble under the impact, but they began to move backward. Yetion frowned as he looked at the surrounding walls moving away from him. A moment later, the walls returned to their original position, and everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Yetion was stunned on the spot. He did not expect this to happen. Boom! At this moment, a loud bang came from behind him, and a stone door appeared. Yetion turned around and looked at the stone door cautiously. He sensed the aura behind the stone door, and after a long silence, he finally walked towards the stone door. After entering the stone door, Yetion walked along the passageway for about a few thousand meters, and finally, a blinding light appeared in front of him. The exit! Yetion's eyes lit up, and he exclaimed in surprise. He sped up and flew towards the exit like a ray of light. He stepped out of the passageway. Boom! At this moment, a loud bang came from the passageway behind him, and the passageway was sealed. Niet Tion's eyes trembled, and his expression changed. He looked around and found himself in a huge circular square, surrounded by huge walls, just like the ones he had seen before. The sky above the square was shrouded by a huge lightning net. Streaks of dazzling lightning surged, forming a huge lightning net in the void. This is... Niet Tion's expression changed slightly as he suddenly realized what was going on. He exclaimed, "The arena." That's right, he was in the middle of a huge arena. When he came out from the passageway, he found himself in the middle of a martial arts arena. How could he not be surprised? Niet Tion, you actually escaped the devouring of the blood soul. This is really unexpected. Just as Niet Tion was feeling bewildered, a deep voice suddenly rang out from the void. It was like rolling thunder, and it seemed to come from all directions. Blood soul ancestor! Niet Tion's expression changed, and he cried out in shock. This voice belonged to the blood soul ancestor. Niet Tion, I have to admit that you are the only exception to the path of the blood soul that has been open for so many years. The voice of the blood soul ancestor was heard again, and he said in a deep voice, "But this is nothing. You are destined to die here, and it will only add some fun to the path of the blood soul." Is that so? The corner of Niet Tion's mouth twitched, and he looked around, trying to find the blood soul ancestor. However, his senses were suppressed in the arena, and he could not sense where the blood soul ancestor was. Niet Tion, the next game is going to be the most exciting. I hope you don't die too quickly. The blood soul ancestor snickered. As soon as he finished speaking, something strange happened. Boom, boom, boom. From a lightning net in the sky, a violent aura gushed out, and like lightning, it landed on the arena. Chapter 37:23. Blood Soul Beast King. When Niet Tion saw the blood soul beast in front of him, he could not help but be shocked. Dozens of blood soul beasts appeared in the arena. Each of them was 1,000 meters long, and their bodies were surging with the power of thunder. Their aura was extremely violent, as if they could tear everything apart. Niet Tion, these blood soul beasts have merged with the power of Xian thunder. Their strength is comparable to that of Saint Tianyi. At this time, the voice of blood soul ancestor sounded. He said in a low voice, "I want to see how long a small shrimp like you, who is only at the heavenly mandate realm, can last in front of these blood soul beasts. Come on." Niet Tianlin smiled coldly, and the corner of his mouth pulled into a cold arc. What was surging in his eyes was not fear, but a strong desire to fight. "I admire your confidence," said Yizichen. Blood soul ancestor sneered, and then a huge spiritual wave surged in the void. Suddenly, the blood soul beasts seemed to be stimulated and became violent. Roar! In the blink of an eye, one of the blood soul beasts let out a thunderous roar and leaped into the air. Like a mountain of lightning, it crashed down on Niet Tion. Boom! High up in the sky, the enormous pressure caused the void to tremble, and Niet Tion immediately felt an incomparably strong strangling force. But he was not afraid at all. The corner of his mouth twitched, and the sword in the sky was in his hand. The soul of the sky was opened, and a strong sword will surged out. He stabbed with the sword, and the shadow of the sword whistled like a wild dragon, setting off a huge momentum in the void. Boom! In the next moment, the terrifying shadow of the sword fell on the blood soul beast. There was a roar in the air, and there was a bloody explosion. There was a bloody hole dozens of meters wide on the body of the blood soul beast, and blood fell like rain. The air was covered in a layer of bloody aura. It was incomparably bloody. Howl! The blood soul beast let out a terrible roar in the air, and then its body stopped and fell straight to the ground, stirring up a wave. After a few convulsions, there was no more movement like a puddle of mud. Patriarch Blood Soul's exclamation echoed out in the void. Obviously, he hadn't expected Niet Tion to be so terrifying that he could kill a blood soul beast with a single strike. One had to know that a blood soul beast that had merged with the power of mystic lightning had the strength of a Lord Tianyi martialist. Niet Tion, on the other hand, was only a saint master in the heavenly mandate realm. Without a doubt, Nietion's strength had far exceeded Ancestor Blood Soul's expectations. Forefather Blood Soul, is this your Blood Soul beast? You can't even withstand a single blow. Niet Tianling laughed coldly as he spoke in a loud voice. His arrogance was tinged with undisguised provocation. With a cold laugh, Patriarch Blood Soul said, Nietion, I'm amazed by your strength. But how much longer can you hold on? That's right. Roar. As soon as he finished speaking, dozens of Blood Soul beasts roared in unison, and an incomparably low aura surged in the void. Kaboom! Immediately, dozens of Blood Soul beasts moved directly. The power of thunder all over their bodies merged together, and suddenly, a terrifying thunder appeared. Like a storm, it roared in the sky and swept up the power of heaven and earth, pressing down on Nietion. Thunder, is it? Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corner of his mouth twitched coldly. Then his body shook, and a huge dragon aura surged out. A sea of thunder appeared behind him, and the figure of a thunder dragon rushed out of the sea of thunder. Its terrifying aura shook the heavens and earth. Roar! In the next instant, the thunder dragon roared, and its 10,000-meter-long body tumbled out of the void. The heavens and earth shook, and time and space seemed to collapse. Kaboom! Boom, boom, boom. Then, the power of thunder fell directly on the body of the thunder dragon. Terrifying power was released, and the entire world seemed to have become a sea of thunder. Waves of thunder exploded, and the heavens and earth were extremely violent. However, the power of thunder did not kill the dragon. Instead, it was directly swallowed. Kaboom! Bang, bang, bang. Then, the figure of the thunder dragon rushed into the sky and rushed towards the dozens of Blood Soul beasts. The void was covered in blood. Die! Nietion's eyes narrowed, and his face darkened. The sword in the sky slashed across the void, and a huge sword shadow suddenly appeared, attacking the dozens of Blood Soul beasts. The moment the sword shadow landed, the heavens and earth were covered in blood, and the dozens of Blood Soul beasts were killed. Nietion's figure hovered high in the sky, like a sharp sword, sharp and penetrating. How is this possible? The terrifying scene caused Ancestor Blood Soul to lose his composure, and he exclaimed. He had never imagined that Nietion would be able to kill dozens of Blood Soul beasts by himself in such a short time. Nietion's strength was terrifying. Ancestor Blood Soul, what else do you have? Bring it on. Tianling stood in the air, and his eyes were extremely gloomy. The corner of his mouth curled into a disdainful smile as he said coldly, Nietion, you are too confident. Ancestor Blood Soul smiled cold, and his deep voice resounded in the void. It was extremely sinister. Roar! Just as his voice faded, a furious roar rang out from the lightning net in the sky. Immediately after, the huge lightning net trembled, and a gigantic silhouette rushed out like a huge black lightning bolt. In an instant, Nietion felt a terrifying aura, and his expression changed as he exclaimed in surprise. Boom! Then, the huge figure landed, and the ground trembled. The entire martial arts arena seemed like it was about to collapse. Nietion's eyes darkened, and his expression changed. What appeared in front of him was a huge Blood Soul beast. It was 5,000 meters long, and its huge figure was like a black mountain. Just by standing there, it gave off an extremely powerful pressure. Nietion, this is the Blood Soul Beast King in front of you. Its strength is comparable to the peak of Lord Tianni. With your strength, can you fight against it? Ancestor Blood Soul's cold voice sounded, and it was extremely low. Nietion's expression darkened, and he did not look good. He stood in front of the Blood Soul Beast King, and he could clearly feel its ferocious aura. It was really too terrifying. With his strength, it was almost impossible to fight against a Blood Soul Beast King. Roar! At this moment, the Blood Soul Beast King roared, and suddenly, its huge body leaped up. Its aura exploded, and the heavens and earth seemed to be oppressed and trembled continuously. Boom! In the next moment, The Blood Soul Beast King fiercely pounced towards Nyetian, and its powerful aura stirred up rolling waves that swept wildly. Nyetian's gaze froze, and his expression changed instantly. Boom! At this moment, a terrifying sword shadow suddenly appeared in the void, and it whistled through the air, directly attacking the Blood Soul Beast King, and instantly descended. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled explosion sounded, and the sword shadow actually blocked the Blood Soul Beast King. The Blood Soul Beast King's figure froze in the air, and it was directly pressed down, and it crashed onto the ground. Nyetian's gaze froze, and he exclaimed in surprise. He looked up into the sky, and he could not help but be stunned by the face that entered his eyes. He said in shock, "It's you." Chapter 37:24. You can't die. When Nyetian saw that the figure that suddenly appeared was actually Dark Nyetian, his eyes couldn't help but narrow, and his expression became sluggish. He had never imagined that the person who would appear at this moment would be Dark Nyetian. "Nyetian, you can't die." Dark Nyetian's eyes darkened. He stared at Nyetian like a pair of sharp blades and said, "Your life is mine. No one can kill you except me." The chilly voice was deep and murderous, and it revealed an incomparably domineering aura. Not only did he inherit powerful strength for Nyetian, but he also seemed to have a decisive and domineering personality. Nyetian's eyes narrowed and his face darkened. The coldness in Dark Nyetian's eyes caused his heart to tremble. He could sense that Dark Nyetian was much stronger than before. Oh! At that moment, Ancestor Blood Soul's voice rang out once again. His voice contained a hint of excitement as he said, "Another exception. You, the Dark Nyetian, are indeed not simple." In the Blood Soul maze, all the Blood Soul martialists had experienced the same Blood Soul devouring as Nyetian. However, the difference was that Nyetian had stopped the Blood Soul devouring. Dark Nyetian was a variable among the Blood Soul warriors. He was born from the God-fiend essence embryo and did not have a Blood Soul in his body. In the Blood Soul maze, Ancestor Blood Soul had tried to forcefully devour Dark Nyetian with his Blood Soul, but he had failed. Nyetian and Dark Nyetian both blocked the Blood Soul devour. Dark Nyetian's eyes were dark and sharp. They flickered with a cold light as he said in a deep voice, "Old man hiding behind me, what other tricks do you have? Feel free to use them." The two of you appearing at the same time is a bit out of my expectations. However, this is fine as well. This ancestor will be able to verify who exactly is stronger between the two of you. Ancestor Blood Soul's cold voice rang out. The moment he finished speaking, the lightning net in the sky trembled once more, and a huge figure charged out. Nyetian's eyes couldn't help but narrow when he saw that enormous figure. In the next moment, his expression changed as he cried out in shock, "Blood Soul Beast King!" Bang! In the next moment, a huge figure landed, and the entire arena shook. It was a Blood Soul Beast King. Nyetian's face darkened. He had not expected another Blood Soul Beast King to appear. The expressions of the two Blood Soul Beast Kings and Dark Nyetian turned ugly. Every Blood Soul Beast King had the strength of a peak stage saint. It was imaginable how difficult it would be for him and Nyetian to deal with two Blood Soul Beast Kings at the same time. Enjoy the battle. Patriarch Blood Soul's voice boomed out at this moment, sounding extremely grim. Roar! At this time, the two Blood Soul Beast Kings roar at the same time. Suddenly, a violent aura spread out, like an invisible giant net, directly enveloping the entire arena. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he immediately felt the violent aura rushing towards him like a wind blade, extremely sharp. Bang! In the next moment, the two Blood Soul Beast Kings stomped madly at the same time, and their enormous bodies leaped up high. Like two mountains, their aura shook the heavens and the earth, and they pounced towards Nyetian and Dark Nyetian, respectively. The Blood Soul Beast King's body was flowing with the power of Xian thunder, and it looked very terrifying. The violent aura surged as though it was going to tear everything apart. Boom! Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he felt the extremely terrifying pressure of the lightning. In the void, a thunderstorm appeared, tumbling between the heaven and earth, and it pressed down crazily. Nietion's face darkened slightly, and he slashed out with the sword of sky. Terrifying sword shadows slashed out wildly, and the void sank. Bang! Immediately after, the sword shadows bombarded the Xian thunderstorm, but they could not withstand the terrifying power of the lightning. They were actually forcibly torn apart, and they collapsed in the void. Nietion's eyes trembled, and he immediately retreated frantically. However, he was still a step too late. The Xian thunderstorm swept over and hit him head-on. Nietion's figure flew backward, and he only managed to stabilize himself after retreating for thousands of meters. However, his face was pale, and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. His body was also covered with horrifying bloody wounds, and the wounds were charred black, as though he had been burned by intense fire. The strength of the Blood Soul Beast King was too strong, and Nietion could not fight it head-on at all. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Dark Nietion. The latter had also suffered serious injuries, and it was obvious that he was being suppressed by the other Blood Soul Beast King. Is this the strength of the two of you? How disappointing. In the void, the voice of the Blood Soul Ancestor sounded again, and there was arrogance and disdain in his deep voice. Join forces. Nietion frowned and looked at Dark Nietion. The latter actually had the same expression as him. At this moment, if the two of them wanted to fight against the Blood Soul Beast King, they had to join forces. Although the two of them were enemies, they had the most intimate connection, and they naturally had a tacit understanding between them. Nietion's figure moved in an instant, and like a stream of light, he directly came to Dark Nietion's side. Nietion, I never thought that the two of us would join forces one day. Dark Nietion's gaze swept over Nietion, and the corner of his mouth twitched coldly. His tone was somewhat strange. If you want to kill me, you'll have to survive first, Nietion responded with a laugh and said in a low voice. He also did not expect that he would actually join forces with Dark Nietion. Good and evil are enemies, and yet you want to join forces. Interesting. In the void, the voice of the Blood Soul Ancestor sounded out, and there was a hint of mockery in it. Come. The eyes of Nietion and Nietion darkened at the same time, and they spoke in unison. Roar! At that moment, the two Blood Soul Beast Kings roared in rage, and then they attacked at the same time. A strong aura spread out, and the power of Xian lightning surged around them. Two thunderstorms appeared, and suddenly, the sky was filled with a terrifying aura of lightning, and it was extremely violent. Nietion. Dark Nietion's eyes trembled as he spoke in a low voice. Then, the sword wheel around his body surged, and a terrifying sword force shot up into the sky. Suddenly, the surrounding space was pulled taut, and it seemed like it would collapse at any moment. Boom! At the same time, a huge sword force rose from Nietion's body, and his entire person was like a giant sword, standing in the void. Why? In the next moment, the two sword forces merged into one, and in the air, a wave of sword will surged out, and the sky and earth trembled. Kill! Both Nietion and Dark Nietion roared at the same time, and suddenly, an endless amount of sword will gathered in the void. A huge and dark shadow of the sword appeared, and like a dark beast from hell, it pressed towards one of the Blood Soul Beast Kings. Boom! At that moment, the void could not withstand the pressure, and everywhere the shadow of the sword passed, a crack appeared in space and time. The light of the sword surged out, illuminating the entire arena. Boom! In the next moment, the shadow of the sword landed on a thunderstorm, and with a roar in the air, the thunderstorm was forcefully torn apart and collapsed. Hula! Then, the shadow of the sword landed on the body of a Blood Soul Beast King, and a loud, tearing sound rang out in the air. Then, there was a patch of red, and the smell of blood instantly spread between the sky and earth. Chapter 3725. Side by side in the void, a bloody scene appeared. The heavens and the earth seemed to be covered with a layer of bloody mist, red and sinister. The body of the Blood-Soul Beast King had not yet landed on the ground when it was crushed by the violent waves of sword will. It turned into a rain of blood that fell from the sky. Such a scene was too shocking. The power of the sword shadow that Niation and Dark Niation had combined forces was beyond imagination. Boom! However, at that moment, another thunderstorm pressed down. There was a roar in the void, and a terrible, strangling power instantly enveloped Niation and Dark Niation. Bang! Bang! Then, two muffled sounds were heard. Niation and Dark Niation were directly sent flying, leaving two bloody trails in the void. Being hit by the thunderstorm head-on, even though their martial bodies were strong, they were still severely injured. The two figures stood coldly in the void, trembling slightly. Their bodies were dripping with blood, and wounds were all over their bodies, as if they had been torn apart by a sharp blade. The power of the Xian thunder was extremely violent. One could imagine the strength of the attack when it directly hit their bodies. If Niation and Dark Niation's martial bodies were any weaker, they would have been killed by the thunderstorm. Niation steadied himself and turned to look at Dark Niation beside him. He said in a low voice, "Are you all right? Don't worry. I won't die before I kill you." Dark Niatin replied coldly. His eyes flashed with a cold light, and his entire person seemed even more sinister and terrifying. What a good combination. At that moment, the Blood-Soul ancestor's voice rang out. He said in a deep voice, "The strength of the two of you is indeed extraordinary. After joining forces, you can actually kill a Blood-Soul Beast King with a single strike. This is truly surprising. Old thing, there is an even bigger surprise waiting for you." Dark Niation let out a cold laugh as the corner of his mouth curled up into a sinister smile. Immediately after, his aura skyrocketed once again, and strands of dark sword intent surged in the air with extreme sharpness. Boom! At the same time, Niation's sword intent also erupted. The Godfiend's sword intent surged and was abnormally violent. The auras of the two sword intents and power were interlinked. When they were released at the same time, they resonated strongly, causing the power of the sword intents to increase by several folds. If not, they would not have been able to kill a Blood-Soul Beast King. At this moment, the two of them once again unleashed a terrifying aura, intending to kill the second Blood-Soul Beast King. Roar! The Blood-Soul Beast King roared, and a terrifying aura filled the void. It was incomparably ferocious. Perhaps it was because of the death of its companion that it was infuriated. At this moment, its aura was much stronger than before. The power of Xian lightning surged violently like a raging wave, tearing and devouring everything in its path. "Little bastard, come at me." Dark Niation's mouth twitched as killing intent surged in his eyes. "Kill!" In the next instant, the two of them roared at the same time. Their minds were connected, and they attacked at the same time. Terrifying sword wills fused in the air as a sharp aura was released. Their sword momentum was like a landslide. Boom! Suddenly, a low rumble sounded in the void. The heavens and the earth shook as if they were about to collapse. Boundless sword intent gathered in an instant, and a gigantic sword shadow appeared. On the body of the sword, there was an extremely dark aura that was suffocating. Roar! The Blood-Soul Beast King felt the waves of sword intent coming from the sword shadow, but it was not afraid at all. Instead, it roared angrily and moved its body, charging straight at the sword shadow. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! The Blood-Soul Beast King's aura was like a mountain as it rushed through the void. Everywhere it passed, it left behind streaks of lightning. It was extremely terrifying. However, the sword shadow in the void was filled with boundless power, as if it could destroy the heavens and the earth. The sword intents collided in the air, causing a space-time vortex to appear. Boom! Then, the sword shadow descended and crashed into the body of the Blood-Soul Beast King. The void suddenly froze, as if time and space had suddenly stopped for a moment. Then there was a deafening roar. Under the sharp sword intent, there was a bloody scene. The Blood-Soul Beast King did not even have the time to let out a cry before its massive body was sliced into two. Then, Under the impact of the violent waves of sword will, it instantly turned into a rain of blood that scattered in the void. Niation and Dark Niation worked together to kill the second Blood Soul Beast King. In the void, the smell of blood filled every corner, and the atmosphere was suffocating. The blood of the two Blood Soul Beast Kings turned into a bloody mist, covering the entire arena. Niation and Dark Niation stood side by side, like two sharp swords, extremely sharp and murderous. Killing two Blood Soul Beast Kings did not make the two of them relax. Instead, it made them even more cautious. They knew that the Blood Soul ancestor would use even more vicious methods next. Good. Very good. The Crimson Void was dead silent for a few seconds. Finally, the Blood Soul ancestor's voice was heard. There was suppressed anger in his voice. The two Blood Soul Beast Kings had been killed. At this moment, the Blood Soul ancestor could no longer be as calm as before. There was a slight tremor in his voice. "Old man, are you going to show your real body next?" Dark Niation Lung laughed arrogantly and provocatively. "You want to see my real body just like that? You are too naive." The Blood Soul ancestor laughed coldly and said, "The two of you are indeed very strong. However, killing two Blood Soul Beast Kings must have caused you to suffer heavy injuries. Next, it is time for you to face your real opponents." Huh? The Blood Soul ancestor's words made Niation's eyes narrow, and his expression changed. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, there was a loud rumble. Then, the walls around the arena caved in, forming a tunnel. When Niation saw the tunnel, he immediately thought of something, and his expression changed. "Is it the Blood Soul Martialists?" Dark Niation frowned. He also understood what was going on, but he laughed coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure walked out of each tunnel. In the blink of an eye, more than 100 martialists appeared in the arena. They were the Blood Soul Martialists who had entered the Blood Soul maze. After the Blood Soul Martialists walked out of the tunnel behind them closed. Their souls had been devoured by the Blood Soul Martialists. Niation frowned as he looked at the Blood Soul Martialists around him. All of them had blank expressions and empty eyes. It seemed that the Blood Soul ancestor wanted these Blood Soul Martialists to fight with them. "Do you think these Blood Soul puppets can stop us?" Dark Niation Lung laughed. His eyes were arrogant and domineering. "Don't look down on these Blood Soul puppets. They're much stronger than you think." The Blood Soul ancestor laughed coldly. Then, a wave of spiritual force appeared in the void and spread across the entire arena. Then, something strange happened. Chapter 37:26. Blood Soul Puppets. When Niation saw the auras of all the Blood Soul realm martial artists skyrocketing, his face could not help but sink. He was astonished. It was as if there was a powerful force awakening in the bodies of the Blood Soul martial artists, pushing their martial physiques to the limit. In the blink of an eye, the strength of the Blood Soul martial artists skyrocketed to the limit. Many Blood Soul martial artists' strength skyrocketed by 5 or 6 levels. Some of them even skyrocketed by an entire realm. It's the Blood Soul. At this moment, Niation's eyes narrowed. He immediately realized that the power that skyrocketed the strength of the Blood Soul martial artists was the Blood Soul. These people's divine souls were devoured by the Blood Soul, and after the Blood Soul absorbed the blood runes, it completely merged with their martial physiques. Therefore, it was not surprising that the Blood Soul could increase their strength. Previously, Niation had also used the power of the Blood Soul to increase his strength. Very smart. Ancestor Blood Soul's gloomy voice sounded. "My Blood Soul is a good thing. The power it contains is not something you can imagine." Niation's eyebrows furrowed as he remained silent. He had merged with the Blood Soul before. The power it contained was indeed terrifying. Dark Niation's face was stern and his eyes were gloomy. "How is it? Do you think these people are your match now?" Ancestor Blood Soul said in a low voice and sneered. Controlling these Blood Soul puppets gave him an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. "Come on, let me see how strong these puppets of yours are." Dark Niation was not afraid at all. He said with a cold smile and was incomparably arrogant. "Indeed, you're someone that I've taken a liking to. Now, I feel that you're even more suited for the Three Souls mystic heart. Patriarch Blood Soul snickered coldly. His evil eyes that were hidden in the void shone with excitement and passion. Kill! Dark Nyetion's eyes darkened. He roared and released his aura crazily. His figure turned into a black ray of light and charged at a Blood Soul puppet. Bang! In the next instant, Dark Nyetion's sword descended, and the Blood Soul puppet didn't even have the chance to react before it was killed. These Blood Soul puppets were originally Heavenly Mandate Saint Masters. After being enhanced by the Blood Soul, most of them had reached the peak of the Saint Master level. However, in the face of Dark Nyetion, such strength was utterly worthless. Only the strongest few puppets had broken through to the level of Great Sage Tiani. In fact, with the power of the Blood Soul, it could raise the power of the Blood Soul puppet to an even higher level. However, the martial bodies of these Blood Soul puppets were too weak. If they released too much of the Blood Soul's power, their martial bodies would explode. Boom! 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 As soon as Dark Nyetion made his move, the other Blood Soul puppets in the vicinity sprang into action and launched several devastating attacks at Nyetion. Dark Nyetion was even more ferocious. He didn't care about the attacks at all. Instead, he moved and directly attacked the other Blood Soul puppets. Bang, bang, bang. Then, there was a series of muffled sounds in the void. A few more Blood Soul puppets were killed, and Dark Nyetion's body also had several wounds. Blood gushed out like a fountain and dyed his entire body red. Nyetion, what are you waiting for? Dark Nyetion steadied himself and suddenly looked at Nyetion and growled. Nyetion frowned. He was a bit hesitant, wondering if he should kill these Blood Soul puppets. After all, these people were genius cultivators selected from various forces in the underworld. It would be a pity if they were killed just like that. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, before Nyetion could make a move, more than a dozen Blood Soul puppets launched attacks at him. One terrifying attack after another surged towards him like wild beasts, stirring up torrential waves in the void as they bore down on him. Boom! Nyetion's eyes narrowed slightly. A terrifying sword momentum soared into the sky and forcibly broke through the attacks. Then, he moved and retreated thousands of meters away. Nyetion, make your move. These people's divine souls have been devoured. Even if you don't kill them, they're no different from the walking dead. Ghost Emperor saw that Nyetion was still hesitating and said in a deep voice, Yes. Nyetion's eyes narrowed, and he nodded deeply. His expression was calm and gloomy like water, and he seemed like a boundless cold pond that was ghastly and murderous. Kill. In the next moment, the corner of his mouth twitched. The sword in the sky swept through the void. The sword's shadow was like a god of death. Everywhere it passed, there was blood. More than a dozen Blood Soul puppets were killed by Nyetion with one sword strike. Boom. However, right at that moment, an incomparably vigorous force shot through the air, and a terrifying vortex appeared in the void. Immediately afterwards, countless spear projections appeared, which morphed into an endless rain of spears that rained down on Nyetion. Nyetion suddenly felt a strangling force coming from behind. His eyes narrowed slightly, and without even looking back, he turned around and slashed out with his sword. Sword shadows whizzed out like dragons, forcibly blocking the endless rain of spears. Just then, he suddenly turned around and saw a warrior in black standing in the void. The warrior's chi was surging, and he stood there like a spear. Third level of heavenly righteousness. Nyetion's eyes narrowed, and he was surprised. The spear-wielding warrior before him, after being strengthened by the Blood Soul, had reached the third level of heavenly righteousness. The spear-wielding warrior stood in the void. His eyes were as cold as a black hole and extremely murderous. Boom! In the next instant, his figure moved. He pointed his black spear at the air, and a vortex appeared on the tip of the spear. Then, countless spear shadows whizzed out, covering the sky and earth as they pressed down on Nyetion. Nyetion's face darkened. This powerful warrior's spears was a little strange and difficult to deal with. Boom! At this moment, Nyetion stepped out and the sword in the sky pierced through the sky. The shadow of the sword howled and rushed towards the endless shadows of spears. One after another, the shadows of spears were crushed. This spear-wielding warrior was strong, but it was not possible for him to kill Nyetian. Bang! Just then, a muffled sound rang out and a bloody shadow was flung out. Nyetian's eyes narrowed and saw that Dark Nyetian was heavily injured. Only then did he realize that most of the Blood Soul puppets were attacking Dark Nyetian. Even though Dark Nyetian was strong, he could not face the attacks of so many Blood Soul puppets at the same time. Damn it! Dark Nyetian steadied himself in the air and growled. His eyes were dark and gloomy. Then, the aura of his body suddenly changed, and celestial demon inscriptions appeared on his face. Celestial demon inscriptions. Seeing this, Nyetian's eyes widened. Dark Nyetian was about to activate the celestial demon body. In an instant, Dark Nyetian's body was covered with celestial demon inscriptions, and his aura increased several times. Finally, this moment has come. At this moment, the deep voice of Ancestor Blood Soul rang out in the void. There was a hint of excitement in his voice. Chapter 37:27. Chapter 37:22. Devouring, huh? The sudden change surprised Nyetian. He turned around to see the Blood Soul vortex, and his face changed. He couldn't believe his eyes. Dark Nyetian had been devoured by the Blood Soul vortex. Boom! At that moment, the aura of the Blood Soul vortex shook and a terrifying spiritual soul fluctuation appeared. It was like an invisible ripple that spread across the void. Nyetian felt his spiritual soul being attacked. His body trembled, and he took a few steps back. Then, a strange scene appeared. The Blood Soul vortex released streaks of blood-colored runes that intertwined in the void. It was like a terrifying attack. The entire arena was filled with a strong Blood Soul aura. Blood Soul devouring. In an instant, Nyetian realized what was going on. His face changed, and he couldn't help but scream. The Blood Soul ancestor was trying to devour Dark Nyetian by force. At this moment, the Blood Soul vortex in the sky was much more powerful than the one Nyetian had sensed in the labyrinth. Its soul power and devouring aura were enough to make one's heart tremble. Nyetian's face darkened, and he was speechless. He could no longer sense Dark Nyetian's aura. He could only see a blurry figure struggling in the Blood Soul vortex. Even Dark Nyetian couldn't resist such a powerful Blood Soul devouring. When the Divine Demon Inverse inscription is activated, your divine soul will be at its weakest. I have been waiting for this moment. Blood Soul Ancestor's deep voice resounded in the void. It was filled with chilling intent. Everything that happened on the Blood Soul path was under his control. He had long noticed that when Nyetian and Dark Nyetian activated the Divine Demon Inverse inscription, their spiritual souls would become weak. He had ordered the Blood Soul puppet to attack Dark Nyetian crazily to force him to use the Divine Demon Inverse inscription. As expected, Dark Nyetian had no choice but to use the inverse inscription when he was seriously injured. This gave Ancestor Blood Soul an opportunity. Damn it, Nyetian understood. His eyes darkened, and he let out a beast-like roar. However, at this time, the power of the Blood Soul had already completely devoured Dark Nyetian. The violent aura of the Blood Soul filled the entire arena. The terrifying aura was suffocating. Under the influence of the Blood Soul aura, the Blood Soul puppets became even more ferocious. They released their auras in a frenzy as they charged toward Nyetian. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly when he felt the surging impact. He took a step forward, and sword momentum surged out of his body. An overbearing sword intent was released, and it was as if he was the ruler of this world at this moment. Kill! Nyetian let out a gloomy roar. Then the sword in the sky swept across the sky. In an instant, the divine demon sword rolled out and turned into endless sword shadows. They attacked crazily in the void like thousands of wild beasts, tearing and devouring everything in their path. Boom, 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 boom. In the next instant, the endless sword shadows fell. Dozens of Blood Soul puppets were attacked and retreated. Some of the weaker Blood Soul puppets were directly killed by the sword shadows. The power that Nyation had unleashed in his rage was so terrifying that it could even pose a threat to Saint Monarch Heaven's righteousness, who was weaker than him. Although the Blood Soul puppets were strong, their martial bodies were not strong. Their strength had increased, but their martial bodies had not. Moreover, under the pressure of the Blood Soul puppets, their martial bodies were even weaker than before. Nyation had gained the upper hand with his sword. He had already identified the weakness of the Blood Soul puppets. His eyes turned cold, and a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. Like a ray of light, he dashed forward crazily. Bang, bang, bang. Wherever his figure passed, blood splattered everywhere. Before the Blood Soul puppet could even attack, it was directly killed by him. Boom! At this moment, a terrifying power appeared, causing the entire world to darken. Within the darkness, a terrifying shadow of a spear appeared, causing the void to rumble as though the entire world was about to split apart. Nyation's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that the spearman had made his move again. Die. However, he didn't retreat at all. Instead, he roared and his eyes turned dark. He turned around and slashed with his sword. Instantly, the shadow of the sword howled in the air and charged forward. Boom! In the next moment, in the darkness, the spear and the sword collided, stirring up a raging wave. The terrifying power wreaked havoc in the space, like a huge roaring wave. Boom! Next, the sword intent in the darkness erupted with a terrifying power. Countless sword shadows surged forth, breaking through the darkness. A moment later, a sword shadow fell down like a waterfall of light, completely shattering the darkness. The void trembled slightly, and a blood-colored figure flew out. Before it could stabilize itself in the air, it directly exploded into a bloody light. In a head-on confrontation, the spearman was no match for Nyation. Nyation killed the spearman with his sword and suffered some injuries, but he didn't care at all. His eyes were fixed on the Blood Soul vortex in the air. At this moment, he felt that the aura of the Blood Soul force was even stronger. The aura of Dark Nyation had completely disappeared. It seemed that Dark Nyation had been devoured. Ancestor Blood Soul, I will kill you. Nyation's eyes narrowed and a cold, murderous intent flashed in his eyes. With a roar, the sword intent in his body suddenly skyrocketed to the extreme. Holding the sword in the sky with both hands, he slashed out angrily. Boom! The shadow of the sword stirred up a raging wave in the air and directly attacked the Blood Soul vortex. For some unknown reason, Ancestor Blood Soul forcibly devoured Dark Nyation, made Nyation feel inexplicably angry. His whole body seemed to be burning. Buzz! In the next moment, the shadow of the sword suddenly fell and the void suddenly trembled as if it was about to collapse. But what happened next was a shocking scene. There was a low roar in the air, and the shadow of the sword was blocked by the Blood Soul vortex. The void suddenly stagnated, and the raging waves were extremely violent. Nyation's expression flickered with astonishment, and he couldn't be more shocked. The Blood Soul vortex didn't look very strong, but it was able to withstand a direct attack from him. It was really terrifying. Nyation, you can't stop me. At this moment, a low, murderous voice sounded, and a violent aura surged and filled the entire arena. This voice is... The low voice suddenly sounded in his ear and made Nyation's eyes tremble. He stared at the Blood Soul vortex and shouted a name in shock. Ancestor Blood Soul. The voice just now was Ancestor Blood Soul, and this voice actually had a source. It was coming from the Blood Soul vortex. In the next moment, Nyation realized what was going on, and his expression flickered as he exclaimed, "He's been possessed." Chapter 37:28. Inexplicable rage. After Nyation understood, his eyes trembled and his face froze. He didn't think that Ancestor Blood Soul would directly take over Dark Nyation's body. This was a possession. From now on, this body belongs to this ancestor. At this moment, the Blood Soul vortex let out a low and sinister laugh. Then, the vortex began to tremble and released waves of terrifying divine soul. Nietian immediately felt his divine soul being attacked, and he retreated. Boom! Then, the blood soul vortex began to condense and crazily surged into dark Nietian's body. This blood soul vortex is the heart of three souls. Nietian's eyes trembled as he realized something and shouted in shock. Ancestor blood soul took over dark Nietian's body and directly merged with the heart of three souls. No wonder this seemingly ordinary blood soul vortex was so powerful. It turned out to be the heart of three souls. Nietan, it's too late for you to understand this now. Ancestor blood soul said in a low and sinister voice, I no longer have a body. I only rely on the heart of three souls to ensure that my divine soul is not destroyed. A long time ago, I opened the path of the blood soul just to find a suitable body. But there are too few martial bodies that can perfectly merge with the heart of three souls. I will not easily give up on the heart of three souls just for a body. Luckily, the heavens do not disappoint those who wait. Finally, you have come. After hearing Ancestor Blood Soul's words, Nietian's eyes trembled even more violently. So the so-called Path of Blood Soul was only a method that Ancestor Blood Soul used to find a new body. This method was indeed very clever. The Path of Blood Soul attracted the most talented martial artists in the Yin world, but they didn't know that they had entered the Path of Blood Soul to be toyed with. Ha ha ha! Ancestor Blood Soul laughed maniacally and said, Nietian, you have the heaven and earth sword heart in your body. You can no longer fuse with the three souls' profound heart. I was thinking about how to force the heaven and earth sword heart out, but I didn't expect a dark you to appear at this time. Furthermore, dark Nietian's martial body is stronger than yours and is more suitable for the three souls' profound heart than you. The heavens are really helping this ancestor. Ha ha ha! At the end of his speech, Ancestor Blood Soul roared with laughter. At this moment, the blood soul vortex outside his body had been completely absorbed and perfectly fused with his martial body. Damn you! Nietian's eyes were murderous as he spoke coldly. The sword will around him surged crazily, forming a storm of sword will outside his body, and the sharp aura seemed to tear everything apart. No wonder Ancestor Blood Soul had never revealed his true body. It turned out that he had lost his body a long time ago, and he was only relying on the three souls' profound heart to maintain his soul. But now Ancestor Blood Soul had a real body. However, due to the limitations of his body, his strength was only the same as Dark Nietian. Nietian, you were once defeated by Dark Nietian. Now, do you think you are a match for me? Ancestor Blood Soul sneered. His eyes, which were already dark to begin with, now had a hint of bloodlust in them, and they were red and violent. Nietian looked at the Ancestor Blood Soul in front of him, who had the same appearance as him. This caused the anger in his heart to surge, and his eyes seemed to be burning with dark red flames. Ancestor Blood Soul was confident that he could defeat Nietian with ease, not to mention that he had so many Blood Soul puppets to help him. Bring it on! Nietian's eyes turned cold, and his face was filled with murderous intent. The sword will around him surged crazily, and the sharp aura was incomparably sharp. Go! Ancestor Blood Soul's lips twitched coldly, and he growled. He did not attack personally, but let the Blood Soul puppets go first. Boom! 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 As soon as he uttered these words, dozens of Blood Soul puppets sprang into action simultaneously. Waves of incomparably violent auras filled the void, and like enormous tidal waves, they rushed towards Nietian with murderous intent. Dying! Nietian felt the oppressive aura coming from all directions, but he was not afraid in the slightest. Instead, the corner of his mouth twitched. Then, the clear sky sword swept across the void. Sword light flowed out, and sword formation runes appeared one after another. They exploded in the void, instantly forming a huge sword formation. Sword array in the sky. At this moment, Nietian did not hesitate to use the sword array in the sky. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. The next moment, the sword array began to move in the sky, and a tremendous force was unleashed, followed by muffled noises. Dozens of Blood Soul puppets were instantly killed, and not even their bones were left. Ancestor Blood Soul's expression changed upon seeing this, and he could not help but exclaim. He did not expect Nyetian to be able to unleash such a terrifying sword array, despite being heavily injured. The sword in the sky that was born from the heart of the heaven and earth sword is indeed extraordinary. Ancestor Blood Soul's eyes darkened, and he snickered. But what else do you have after using the sword array? My methods are enough to kill you. Nyetianling laughed. Like a ray of light, his figure swept across the sky. Everywhere he passed, flesh and blood splattered. He did not give the other Blood Soul puppets any chance to attack. With the power of the sword array in the sky, he instantly killed them all. Interesting. Ancestor Blood Soul did not panic at all when he saw Yi. Instead, the corner of his lips twitched, revealing a playful smile. To him, these Blood Soul puppets were merely tools that he could do without. He could do without them. He did not feel sad for the death of the Blood Soul puppets. Now, the way he looked at Nyetian, other than surprise, was filled with excitement and passion. If he could get his hands on Nyetian's heart of the heaven and earth sword, then it would be great. Perhaps he could find a way to merge the two hearts. If he could possess two hearts of the heaven and earth at the same time, then he, Ancestor Blood Soul, will be the first person in history to do so. It's your turn. After killing all of the Blood Soul puppets, Nyetian stood in midair like a grim sword, his eyes grim to the extreme as he stared at Patriarch Blood Soul and said in a grim voice, Patriarch Blood Soul. Then bring it on. Ancestor Blood Soul laughed maniacally and said, Let me see how capable you, the leader of Clear Sky, are. In the next second, his entire body's chi crazily unleashed and reverberated in the sky. Like a giant dark abyss, it was extremely terrifying. Nyetian's gaze froze, unable to conceal the shock he felt. Chapter 37:29. Chapter 37:24. Chapter 37:24. How are you going to do that? Nyetian, are you afraid now? Ancestor Blood Soul's entire body surged with demonic energy. Cold laughter rang out, sounding incomparably arrogant. Make your move. Nyetianling smiled, equally arrogant. Very good. Ancestor Blood Soul laughed sinisterly, after which he stabbed out with his finger, causing the surrounding devilish chi to congeal as a blade of darkness appeared in the air. This blade of darkness was incomparably sharp, and the aura it exuded seemed to be able to pierce through one's heart. It flickered in the air, and with an inconceivable speed, it shot towards Nyetian. So fast, Nyetian's heart trembled. In that instant, he actually felt a fatal threat. A very real sense of death arose spontaneously from the bottom of his heart. This was the first time Ancestor Blood Soul had made a move, and he did not expect it to be so strange. The next moment, before the dark blade descended, Nyetian felt a chill on his neck. If this blade of darkness pierced through his neck, it would definitely kill him instantly. At the moment of life and death, Nyetian became cold. His body slightly staggered, moving about half a meter away. Bang! At this moment, a black shadow flew past his eyes, and then he felt a chill on his neck, and then a warm liquid gushed out. This dark blade brushed past his neck. If it had been a little closer, it would have definitely severed his neck. However, even though Nyetian dodged the dark blade head-on, he was still injured by the sharp blade. There was an extremely thin wound on his neck. If it had been half an inch deeper, it would have been fatal. I dodged it. When Patriarch Blood Soul saw that Nyetian had dodged his attack, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise and excitement. Kill! At this moment, Nyetian ignored the injuries on his body. He only remembered to roar and slash out with his sword. The shadow of the sword was like a mountain crashing over. The surging sword intent was like a tsunami, killing everything in its path. However, the Blood Soul ancestor did not choose to face it head-on. Instead, his figure trembled in the void before disappearing into a Blood Soul vortex. Boom! The enormous sword image descended, but it struck the martial arena and missed. This strange scene caused Tion's expression to darken, and his expression to turn extremely ugly. He did not expect progenitor Blood Soul to have such a strange technique. Tion, you seem to have forgotten that this is the path of Blood Souls. This ancestor is extremely familiar with every inch of space here. At this moment, Ancestor Blood Soul's gloomy and provocative voice resounded in the void. It's impossible for you to defeat me here. Whoosh! As soon as the last word was spoken, a sharp, tearing sound rang out in the void. Then, another blade of darkness appeared and attacked Tion. Tion's expression changed, and he immediately dodged to the side. However, he was still a step too late. A bloody wound appeared on his chest, and blood instantly dyed half of his body red. Damn it, he growled. Like a beast trapped in a cage, he expanded his divine sense and searched the entire martial arena. However, he could not even find the shadow of the Blood Soul ancestor. Right now, he was exposed in the open, while the Blood Soul ancestor was hidden in the dark. He was like a live target for the Blood Soul ancestor, allowing the latter to slaughter him. Tion, this feeling of hopelessness doesn't feel good, does it? In the void, the Blood Soul ancestor's voice rang out again. This time it was extremely gloomy and cold. I want you to experience what it feels like to be hopeless. Tion's expression was gloomy as he breathed heavily, like an injured beast. He did not speak. His eyes flickered with coldness as he observed his surroundings. If he cannot even find the Blood Soul ancestor, then he can only wait for death in this battle. Whoosh! Just then, a murderous voice rang out in the void. Then, another bloody wound appeared on Tion's body. Tion's expression was gloomy and cold to the extreme. Following that, numerous blades of darkness appeared. Bloody wounds appeared one after another on Tion's body. His entire body was a mess of flesh and blood, and one could no longer tell that he was human. The Blood Soul ancestor was obviously torturing him, tearing him apart bit by bit, causing him to die slowly. Tion's aura was slowly weakening. However, his eyes were still as sharp as ever. In the darkness, he appeared even more murderous. Tion, it's all over now. At this moment, the Blood Soul ancestor's voice rang out again. Next, a black whirlpool appeared in the air. The Blood Soul ancestor stepped out from it as his lips curled into a murderous smile. He then slammed out with his palm towards Tion. Boom! Creak, creak, creak. In midair, an endless amount of dark devil chi condensed, forming into a black claw. Wherever the 5 fingers passed, the void would be torn apart. This black claw's aura was much stronger than the blades of darkness. In fact, it was even sharper than the blades of darkness. As long as the sharp claw landed, Tion would definitely die without a trace. The Blood Soul ancestor's face was gloomy. The dignified master of the sky had died in his hands. This gave him a perverted sense of satisfaction. Finally, you're willing to show yourself? However, at this moment, Tion suddenly turned around. His body trembled and a vast amount of devil chi appeared. On his bloody body, terrifying runes appeared one after another. Divine Devil and Verse marks. The Divine Devil and Verse marks covered Tion's entire body, making him look extremely strange. He looked like a devil that had just walked out of hell. Outside his body, the demonic chi roared and roared into the sky. It was extremely violent. Tion didn't dare to use the Divine Devil and Verse marks because he couldn't control this power. However, at this moment, he had no other choice but to fight with his life on the line. No matter what price he had to pay for activating the Divine Devil and Verse marks, he would bear it. Slash! In the next moment, Tion held the sword of the sky in his hand and slashed. Suddenly, a black sword shadow appeared in the void and slashed towards the Blood Soul ancestor. Kaboom! Immediately, the black sword shadow landed on the black claw. The sharp claw paused in the air for a moment before it was forcefully split open. Blood Soul ancestor suddenly felt that something was wrong and couldn't help but exclaim, "Bang!" However, in the next moment, the sword shadow landed on the Blood Soul Ancestor. There was a muffled sound in the air, and Blood Soul Ancestor's body was sent flying. Blood Soul Ancestor retreated a few thousand meters in the air before he managed to stabilize his body. However, there was a horrifying wound on his chest, and blood kept flowing out. How is this possible? Blood Soul Ancestor shouted in shock as he stabilized his body. He had never expected that Nietion's body would hide such a terrifying power. He knew about the divine devil and verse marks, but he didn't know that Nietion had merged the divine devil and verse marks so perfectly. Blood Soul Ancestor, what do you think of my skills? At this moment, Nietionling said coldly. His eyes were cold and murderous like a wolf's, shining with a cold and poisonous light. Very good. Blood Soul Ancestor's eyes darkened, and he growled. Then his body shook, and a stream of blood soul force gushed out. The wound on his chest instantly healed. Chapter 37:30. A crazy battle ancestor Blood Soul was healing his wounds with the power of the Blood Soul when he suddenly felt something. His face fell, and he couldn't help but scream out. But the next second, he regained his composure. It was just that his face still carried a hint of shock. He couldn't believe it. At that moment, he felt a surge of spiritual chi. It was Dark Nietion's spiritual chi. Dark Nietion's spiritual chi should have been devoured and completely disappeared. Why would it suddenly emit a fluctuation? Ancestor Blood Soul's heart was in turmoil, and he couldn't believe it. But now that he was facing Nietion, he had to maintain his composure. Unfortunately, Nietion saw Ancestor Blood Soul's reaction just now. The latter's eyes narrowed, as if he had discovered something. At that moment, Nietion also felt Dark Nietion's aura. He hasn't been completely devoured. Nietion immediately understood. His eyes quivered, and he cried out in joy. At this moment, he felt an inexplicable sense of excitement. Or to be more precise, joy. Dark Nietion was going to kill him. Why would he have such a strange feeling? How is this possible? At this moment, Patriarch Blood Soul was even more flabbergasted and appalled. He couldn't figure out why Nietion's soul was still intact, even though he had already devoured it completely. This was too inconceivable. Dark Nietion's divine soul had actually survived after being devoured by the three souls' profound heart. This was simply impossible. Ancestor Blood Soul's heart was in turmoil, and he couldn't believe what had just happened. However, at this moment, the wisp of Dark Nietion soul awareness was strangely gone, as if it had never existed. Let's kill Nietion first. Ancestor Blood Soul calmed down, and his eyes darkened. He planned to kill Nietion first, and then deal with Dark Nietion. He wanted to slowly torture Nietion to death, but now he had to kill Nietion directly. He couldn't waste any more time. Patriarch Blood Soul, are you afraid? Nietion saw the trace of panic in Patriarch Blood Soul's eyes and said with a cold smile, "You still dare to be so arrogant in the face of death." Patriarch Blood Soul let out a bellow as he sprang into action. Demon Chi and Blood Soul power gushed out of him, filling him with an incomparably mighty aura. Then, he made a grabbing motion with his palm, causing numerous dark blood soul magical symbols to appear in the air. In the blink of an eye, they wove into a dark net of blood souls, which spread out towards Nietion from every direction. Come! Nietion felt an extremely terrifying, strangling power above his head, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, he let out a low roar, and his whole body's aura surged in an instant. The sky sword swept across the void, and the sword light surged for tens of thousands of meters, like a giant dragon, madly rushing towards the blood soul net. Boom! In the next moment, a terrifying collision occurred. Suddenly, the void suddenly sank, and the surrounding space directly darkened. Endless wild power surged out like a giant wave, as if it wanted to swallow the sky and the earth. This was the second time that Nietion and Patriarch Blood Soul had collided head-on. Nietion, who was in the void, could feel the endless blood soul force enveloping him, like a storm completely tearing his body apart. But at this moment he had activated the celestial demon inverse mark, and his martial body was incomparably tyrannical. Even the blood soul force could not tear his body apart. Nietian, it seems that I have underestimated you. Patriarch Blood Soul roared in a low voice. His face was incomparably ferocious, and his eyes were filled with boundless darkness. Originally, he had thought that even if he could not directly kill Nietian, he would definitely be able to certainly injure Nietian severely. But unfortunately, he had underestimated Nietian. With the celestial demon inverse mark activated, Nietian's martial body was terrifyingly strong. Even the bloody soul storm could not harm him at all. Patriarch Blood Soul had just taken over the body of Dark Nietian, so he could not perfectly use the power of this body. And the three souls' profound heart had also just been merged, so was also unable to unleash a strong power. Therefore, at this moment, if Patriarch Blood Soul wanted to kill Nietian, it would not be easy. The price of underestimating me is only one word, death. Nie Tianling laughed, and his eyes were filled with extreme killing intent. Then his body flickered in the dark void, and the sword in the sky struck out. Accompanied by the burning blood chi, a giant sword shadow appeared, like a raging dragon, madly attacking Patriarch Blood Soul. Patriarch Blood Soul suddenly felt a terrifying pressure, and his expression changed, and he could not help but let out a cry of surprise. He had never thought that Nietian's attack would be so violent. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Patriarch Blood Soul's body shook, and the power of the Blood Soul surged, forming a shield of the Blood Soul, covering his entire body. Under Nietian's powerful attack, Patriarch Blood Soul had no choice but to defend himself. Kaboom! Crack! In the next moment, the giant sword shadow descended, and suddenly the void sank and the earth shook. The surrounding waves were extremely violent, and then a crisp sound was heard. The shield of the Blood Soul actually cracked under the direct attack of the sword shadow. How is this possible? Patriarch Blood Soul let out a strange cry, and then the shield of the Blood Soul on his body cracked, and his entire body was sent flying under the huge impact. Nietian took a step forward, and like a sword god, he stood in the void, and the sword will around him was extremely fierce. How can you be so strong? Patriarch Blood Soul steadied himself, and his eyes trembled, and his face was full of shock. I've said it before, the price of underestimating me is only one word, death. Yet Tianling sneered, and his body moved again. The sword in the sky slashed across the void, and the sword light was like a shooting star in the darkness, and the sword shadow headed straight for Patriarch Blood Soul. He had already discovered that when Patriarch Blood Soul was injured, Nietian's soul would appear. Nietian, you forced me to do this. At this moment, Patriarch Blood Soul's eyes darkened, and he roared, and then the power of the Blood Soul erupted from his body like a tsunami, forming a terrifying impact in the void. Boom! In the next moment, the endless power of the Blood Soul condensed into a giant outside of Patriarch Blood Soul's body. The giant was hundreds of meters tall, and its aura shook the heavens, and it was majestic. Bang! Then, the giant waved his hand in the air, and a muffled sound of an explosion was heard. The giant sword shadow was directly smashed into pieces, and the endless sword will turned into waves and dissipated. Nietian's eyes trembled, and then he felt a huge force falling on him, and before he could even react, he was directly sent flying, and a trail of blood appeared in the air.